very much for having me. Big fan of what you guys do. Love the magazine, and it's awesome to be here to share a tale of, it's a bit of a Disney thing with dreams coming true, and there were setbacks, there were some big lucky wins, and overall it was probably one of the greatest experiences of my life. So I'm happy to chat about it.
Fantastic. So, of course, what we're talking about today, obviously, we've got, just for a bit of background for everyone, we've got Luke Jackson, co-editor of Sportscar Safaris, in your top left corner.
Hey.
He's coming out of Adelaide, South Australia. We've got Geordie, obviously, top right, coming out of a farm in rural Victoria somewhere. Myself, bottom left, I'm coming out of Cambridge here. Obviously, we're all isolating as we should be. And yeah, we're discussing Geordie's Jaguar XJR-15 chassis 018, I believe. So it's a car that Geordie found in a very much different state than what you see it in the image at the moment. Brought it back to Australia from Japan, and it underwent an extensive project to rebuild it and bring it into the condition you see. So it's just a really cool story. I've been really lucky. Obviously we could have Geordie here for hours and hours and hours discussing the projects he's been involved in. And I've been lucky to interview him for a few of them. You may have read on the TWR, the Bathurst, the 85 Bathurst XJS. And the Dodge Viper. And every time I interview Geordie, I just sort of think that, I just want to publish the interview because it's just so fascinating, and there's so much detail and enthusiasm and passion that it's, I think it's going to be fascinating to hear the story. So I think, Luke, just quickly, we want to touch on just some of the tech challenges we've faced in the last couple of days bringing this podcast. Obviously, we're not the only ones at the moment that are trying to live stream all of a sudden.
What we found is we've decided to do this the hardest way possible, which is live video across the world when everyone is at home, working from home, trying to watch videos at home, entertain kids who are on school holidays, all that kind of stuff. So we found the streaming platform that we used last week. We had a couple of glitches with, and so we switched over to a new one today. So bear with us again. Hopefully it's all ironed out and you can hear us loud and clear and see us, because we got some great pictures from Geordie this time around as well. I love the nerdy side of the restorations, the nitty gritty, the underneath, the little bits and pieces that, as wonderfully descriptive as Geordie is, pictures just help that little bit more. Pictures than 1,000 words. So, just bear with us a bit today. Hopefully internet holds out and we should be all good. Excited. So pumped for this today. It's great.
Yeah, it's fantastic to finally have Geordie here. So, mate, why don't you start to just give, obviously we follow your every step on social media at Bespoke Motorcars. It's probably one of the best Australian follows you'll have on Instagram, and definitely I'd suggest in the world. Why don't you tell us a bit about who you are for those that don't know?
All right. Yeah. Well, I'm a 34-year-old, just absolute living, breathing car nut. I was born into it. My father's been a Jaguar mechanic since he was a teenager, I tried a few different career avenues. I worked in aviation. I worked as a pilot. I worked as a mechanical engineer in aerospace. I worked as an aerospace project engineer, and all the while I was doing all of these things, I had these car projects on in the background. And as I went through it all, I realized that I was having more fun doing these car projects than I was actually doing my day job. So eventually I created this business where I sort of just one day just quit my job. I was working for a subcontractor for Boeing, working on the 787 Dreamliner. I just thought, what am I doing? I'm wasting my life. So I walked away. 3 months later, I stumbled upon this car, and the business had already been going for about 3 months at this point. So this is sort of late 2014, early 2015. But I sort of count stumbling across this XJR-15 as when the business started proper, because it's when sort of things went from being quite cool and quite exciting, but it became a job that I didn't, I've got a beautiful family at home and all of that, but I was constantly thinking about everything I'm doing all the time at work. And even when I'm at home, I'm still, this project, it really consumed me. And That's what I sort of try and do with the business is everything, all of the projects I take on, they're all passion projects for me. Most of the things we do are things that I'm interested in. I very rarely take on work if it's not something I'm passionate about, because if you're not passionate about it, you're wasting your time. So this is this car, getting back to the car, it's sort of ground zero for the business. Once I did this project, we took it to Motor Classica. Paul Mathers from ETF was very, very gracious to have us at Motor Classica once the car was finished. We finished it literally the morning of, and the business sort of exploded from there. And I've sort of never looked back. Yeah, I absolutely love what I do, and we've myself and some great people that are behind me. We've done some great things, but that 15, that chassis 18 that we found in Yamagata is sort of where is sort of ground zero, and I'm so grateful to it. That car, it's part of me.
And I guess it's an interesting, if we're talking about this, your business, where, Sports Car Safari issue 3 coming out very soon. We're featuring Geordie's most recent project, which was the complete restoration of a Murcielago RGT as driven by David Brabham. So that's kind of the scale of, a lot of stuff has flown on from this project. And yeah, you're right. It really is the basis of, a hell of a lot of really cool things. So I guess, why don't we start? What is the XJR-15? Because it's a car that flew under the radar for a long time, and 53 made really has the bones of a proper Le Mans car.
Yeah, look, in essence, it's a Group C racing car, a Le Mans 24-hour Group C racing car that you can go and you can go to the shops and go to 7-Eleven and pick up your milk in. It's hilarious, and I literally did that a few times. I actually went shopping with it. So it's basically, it was built as a joint venture between Tom Walkinshaw Racing and Jaguar. They created a joint venture company called Jaguar Sport, where TWR built a sort of a run of very, very special road-going performance Jaguars under the Jaguar name, but they were built and serviced and run by Tom Walkinshaw Racing, which of course, they'd already had such a massively successful run in Group A touring cars, in Group C World Sports Cars, and that sort of led to the 15 with the XJR-9 that won Le Mans 24-hour in 1988. They were so proud of what they'd done, and so sort of wanting to celebrate, they came up with this idea of taking the XJR-9, the car that an all-out, absolutely insane, Group C carbon fiber monocoque racing car that was never built with any form of road use in mind. They said, let's take this car, let's do the absolute minimum amount of modifications and let's sell it. And
sounds like a fantastic idea.
Sort of like a car that's far more well known as say like a McLaren F1 GTR, GTR LM, the LM. This is kind of the reverse of that. That's a halo car for McLaren, but that is a road car that became a Le Mans winning car, whereas this is a Le Mans winning car that became a road car.
That's incredible. And obviously at the time, it's a rather interesting time, because you had the XJ220, which, was originally slated in concept to be quite similar with the V12, and that was obviously changed to a turbocharged V6. How did, how did that fit in? I've read a few things that there was some...
That really fit in, because they were sort of in development concurrently together, and then sort of Tom developed the XJR-15 largely in secret behind Jaguar's back and without their knowledge.
Yeah.
All the while he was managing he was about to take over the XJ220 project and productionize it for Jaguar.
Yeah.
In the background, he was developing the XJR-15. So when it finally came to light that they were about to release two supercars that were very, very much encroaching on each other's territory, that's sort of when the Jaguar-TWR relationship began to dissolve. And it's a crying shame, because up until that point, they'd achieved so much, and they really had so much left to achieve as well. You have to look at the cars that TWR developed that went on to win Le Mans later, like the Porsche C095, which was based on the Jag XJR-14. That won Le Mans twice, that car. So that they could have been another two victories for Jaguar. And unfortunately, there's sort of the sad footnote as part of the XJR-15's legacy that it probably was the beginning of the end that amazing sort of titanic and iconic relationship between Walkinshaw and Jaguar.
Well, from what I remember as a kid, the XJ220 was always the more prominent, top tier Jag, like all the road tests.
So you're far more likely to see one on the road. They're kind of like Jekyll and Hyde. Like a 220 is on the limit. It's a frightening car and it's devastatingly quick, but you're able to actually use it, quite practically. It has a little bit of luggage space, and off boost. It's a real kitten. I've driven a few of them and they're lovely cars. But an XJR-15 is, it is everything turned up to 11. The heat, the vibration, the sound. They came with those. Quite famously, they came with those headsets. You almost, unless you literally have to have an intercom to speak to somebody. Their head is right there next to you. To speak to them and have a conversation.
And you could order one with a proper 6-speed dog box, couldn't you? As well, there was the 2 gearbox options.
So we had chassis 19 here in Australia for a long time. That's another one that I found hiding in a warehouse in Japan.
As you do.
Crazy, to 1991, £500,000 was a lot of money. So the base price in XJ15 was 500,000 quid. And to have the Synchromesh 5-speed gearbox over the top of a 6-speed dog engagement race box. So the 5-speed was actually a cost option. £54,000 cost option.
Is that like an F1 gearbox of like the early Ferraris? People pay so much more money, yet
kind of.
It's a worse option. It's not a really good option.
Absolutely not. They both have their merits, and neither of them are sort of a bad way to go. And most people specified with the road cars for sure. All but one specified the Synchromesh transmission. The only 6-speed road car that I've ever seen is the one that we had in Melbourne here for a little while, which was chassis 19, sister chassis, first car I owned, which was 18.
So I guess the spec. So you've got a carbon Group C tub, V12, which was loosely based on the same sort of motor from the XJR9.
So the specs of the car, they basically took the monocoque of an XJR9. You've got these big sort of rectangular sills that you sit between. They widened them out so you could get an extra seat in. They splayed, because in an XJR9 you sort of sit in the middle, so they splayed the steering column off the side. So when you sit in an XJR-15, you actually notice the steering wheel's on a slight angle. Steering rack, suspension arms on the front, and uprights, and all of those sort of things that are straight from an XJR-9. The engine is sort of where things start to go away from the XJR-9 spec quite a lot. So the engine probably got more in common with an XJ-RS, which was the limited production sort of special XJS that was being built to celebrate all of their victories with these things. So it was a 6-litre engine with a forged Cosworth crankshaft, forged Cosworth pistons, Zytec programmable custom fuel injection and ignition management. So it was a long way in spec from an XJR9, and for very, very pragmatic reasons, because an XJR9 engine, it's built to do a maximum of 1 Le Mans, which it's all well and good. Now you're starting to see hypercars with Formula 1 engines like the AMG one, but they're talking 2,000-kilometre rebuild intervals. So can you imagine, like 8,000 Ks before you're due for an engine? So that's 4, 5, 6,000 K. Once you go over that, they're starting to get towards it being appropriate to do a major service on the engine. So they very, very cleverly detuned the engine quite a fair way. But they did build 5 examples of the 15, which had the full fat, off its absolute tree engine, which was the XJR-15 LM, which had the 1991 Le Mans spec engine, which was an XJR-12 LM engine. So that's 7.4 litre, around 780 brake horsepower. So you think 1991 supercar specs, can you imagine a car being built by an OEM linked, so being built by Jaguar, a car being put out from an OEM. So this isn't Willie Koenig. This isn't one of those big tuning houses at the time. This is actually Jaguar putting out 780 brake horsepower. Like but they did it. of them, and all of them went to Japan, and I was very fortunate actually to have a close look at one recently. If you have a look at my Instagram page, I'm sort of slowly trickling out little bits of that car, and we've got a video coming up soon.
Fantastic.
A bit of a walk around, which I'll post. But yeah, that's a mighty car. But
Yeah.
getting back to road cars, they're pretty damn extreme. You know, once you've been out for probably about an hour in one, you're spent. You're hot. You're sweaty. You know, you've been out in a Group C car. You know, it's the engine is a stress member, so all of those, you know, those 12 those 12 pistons going up and down, all of the valves opening and closing. You can hear everything. You can hear the synchros catching. You feel it all because the engine is a stress member. It's actually part of the structure of the car, and it's the cylinder heads are right here behind your head. You feel and hear everything. So it's sort of the thing I say to a lot of people. If people say which is better, the 15 or the 220, you really can't say either is better. If you've had one, you need to have the other because they're great cars.
Yeah.
They both complement each other in a lot of ways, and there's collectors all around the world. You know, people like Steve-O, who on Instagram is Jaguar Supercar Driver, or over in the States you've got Just Dylan. They own both because they're very complementary cars.
Yeah. So I guess you know, touching on you've carved out a bit of a niche for yourself recently of you know, finding these cars in Japan, and I know we've spoken offline about, you know, the thrill of the chase just as much being as much a fun. So guide us through the process of, you know, how did you hear about this car and what was it? What happened to it?
Well, there's that's the reason why it's called Mr. XJR-15.
15.
Right?
Who else can do what Geordie does?
Oh, look, it's a shame. You know, I've dealt with a lot of 15s that I've supplied to clients, and I'm not allowed to show them because of non-disclosure agreements. It's a shame because there's been some incredible cars that we've dug out of Japan and Singapore as well. They're starting to dry up now, but there's still a few left. But yeah, look, it's a dream come true for me, really. You know, I grew up as a small boy. You know, when I was 6 years old or 5 years old when the 15 came out. So I used to go to sleep as a kid every night with the 15 as a poster on my wall. So for me to now have a business that heavily concentrates in those cars, you know, which I consider to be really the high watermark of the car. 90s supercars for me are the absolute high watermark of automotive. I think after the 90s, things went down. The car is no longer as engaging. You know, that's why you're now starting to see cars like McLaren F1s approaching the value and the sort of the intrinsic worth of a car like a Ferrari 250 LM. You know, it's crazy that a car built so recently can already be so valuable.
Yeah. So so you've dug these cars up, and so I guess chassis 15. We'll bring some pictures up to show, but it had there's only 53 of these cars around. Sorry, 18. There's only 53 of these cars built. So when you say they're starting to dry up, there never really was that many of them in the first place.
And that wasn't me. So unfortunately, TWR were never very good at keeping records, and they went broke before these cars started to hit their straps and become very popular and quite valuable. Walkinshaw went broke in the early 90s. So unfortunately, a lot of the records pertaining to these cars no longer exist. So depending on who you speak to, anywhere between 25 and 28 road chassis were built. Myself and some good friends in the UK, people like Valentine Lindsay, we're creating an XJR-15 chassis register. And we're slowly starting to account for every single one of those supposed
fantastic.
So I myself, I've either bought, sold, worked on, or laid my fingers on in some major way. I think 9 or 10 of the supposedly 25 road cars now. So we're sort of inching up towards halfway through the road car production. And yeah, look, it's just incredible. I feel really, really fortunate and incredibly lucky. You know, I'm one of those few guys that absolutely loves their job. For me, it doesn't feel like a job. It feels like I'm being paid to indulge my own hobby. So it's pretty cool. And
I guess
lucky to have sort of like-minded enthusiasts around the world who trust me with this. And you know, it all getting back to chassis 18 to this car we're about to discuss. It all started there. So I've really got all the things that I'm doing today and how much I love my job. and how much I love, getting on a plane, going around the world and chasing cars or whatever, or doing 12, 14, up to 20-hour days, 7 days a week to restore a car in time for a show deadline or something. The fact that none of that feels like work to me is really because of this car. It all started there.
And I think we really see that coming through, because a lot of the guys, a lot of brilliant people, but a lot of in this sort of rarefied world, there's a lot of secrecy and a lot of closure. Whereas one thing that just makes Jordy such a great follow is you're just so open with sharing the stories and the details and involving us on the.
I will, for sure. I think it's a shame that there's so much great stuff there hiding out in garages and collections around the world. And that's something that I try and do with my own cars. I don't have a collection like, the big collections and the big amazing sort of collectors around the world, but I do my best. But I try my hardest to get the cars out there and it sounds a bit wanky, but we really are custodians of these cars. We don't technically own them, and it's up to us to help other people enjoy them and sharing them too. So I try and do that through the IG, and also try and get the cars out there to, like we took the Murcielago GT1, the RGT, to Quail for Car Week last year, and we did some fun stuff on the road with it. It's good actually, enjoy the car and hear it. If you can't do that sort of stuff, why the hell are you in the game? That's sort of the way I look at it.
Yeah, fantastic. That's a refreshing attitude. So, I guess, should we move on now? Just noticing there are quite a few questions coming through, so we will get to those questions and we will get Jordy to answer them. But we'll probably do it at the end. We'll probably get through the story of the car and hear about it, and then we'll roll through the questions. So,
paint the picture, Jordy.
Where do you want to start?
This was the first car you found, and backstory of, I guess, because you weren't that old, really. Like, I mean, relative terms for someone to be this.
I was 27.
Yeah.
I was sort of lucky. I've been, I had a few good jobs through my 20s. I worked in aviation, worked as a pilot, and I worked as a mechanical engineer and as a project engineer. And I've sort of been lucky to save up a bit of money here and there and have the ability to do some fun stuff when the sort of the opportunities presented themselves. But it was sort of what they say, kismet or fate or whatever it was meant to be. One night I was surfing. I was actually looking through Google Images at about 3 a.m. one night, and I was looking for a TWR dry sump off an XJR-9. And I know that the dry sump on an XJR-15 is the same casting. It's not made out of magnesium, it's cast in aluminium, but it's the same thing. And I needed one of those sumps for a project I was working on at the time. So I just started looking around the world and started typing in XJR-15 engines and XJR-15 parts just to see what would come up in Google Images. And this car, this funny looking XJR-15, this white car that it had the silhouette of an XJR-15, but it looked kind of weird, sort of came up in one of my image searches. And I thought, hang on a minute, this has got the turret of a 15, and you can see that most of the shape and the silhouette of it is all correct, but it's clearly highly modified. So I started to look, it was sort of 3 or 4 a.m. by this stage, and I'm a bit of a night owl, and I do a lot of stuff like this at night. I don't sleep very much. So
that never happens to me when I Google search, though. Like, how do you? I Google search something, and I get like 100 Alibaba hits for like cheap Chinese knockoff things. I never find a car.
99% of the time, that's me. But this, literally, I stumbled upon an absolute, like the Hope Diamonds, and it was hiding in plain sight. I stumbled upon, like a giant gold nugget that was just sitting in a field somewhere. It was there to be discovered, and I was just lucky to be the first person on the scene that actually had the guts to chase it. So because there was quite a lot of people in the UK that knew about the car, but no one had actually thought, hey, let's try and find this thing. So I spent the whole night looking at this car, and I realized that they changed the engine. It was owned by this guy called Professor Yoshimasa Hayashi, who was a famous Nismo engineer who was behind the VRH or the VH family of Nismo V8 racing engines that are, they basically are a cult status of engine. They were in so many iconic racing cars from the late 80s all the way up until the early sort of noughties. So over a 12 to 15 year period, they powered some of, unfortunately, you can see it there in the picture. It's a little bit grey, but that is one of Yoshimasa's redesigns of the VRH-35, but that's his own thing. So he created this company called Yellow Magic YGK, and you can see there's a little shield there, a little triangular shield in the middle of the cam cover there.
Yeah.
And that's his little business logo. It's got a buzzing bee on it. It's in the casting. There it is. So that's the YGK logo. But to all intents and purposes, that's actually the same engine that powered, say, a Nissan R390 at Le Mans in the late 90s. But he'd just done a little bit of development post that point and created his own version of that engine once he'd left Nismo. But yeah, so Yoshimasa had created this car. So I'd figured at this stage, I didn't really think it was possible to get the car, but I thought, hang on a minute, if there's an XJR-15 getting around out there that's got an R390 engine sitting in the back, then there must be that V12 sitting on an engine stand somewhere. So that was my initial angle. Yeah, there it is. That's Yoshimasa's engine. So that is
yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's a cool thing, and very iconic. You know, quite a lot of the late 80s and early 90s, you know, really, really iconic Nissan Group C cars were powered by earlier versions of this engine. And that was actually when I first went to look at this car. That was sitting in his front window, and this is the engine. So this is what I was hunting for. This is the engine out of XJR-15 chassis 18. It was sitting on this green stand in their showroom in Yamagata. So I rang up, I went through all of the pictures, and in most of the pictures you could see emblazoned down the side, it said Tokai University of Tokyo, because initially Professor Hiyashi was using Tokai University. Basically, he was using the engineering students there as a way to help further his engineering project. So they would learn off him, and he would use them as a labor force to help develop his technologies, because he was trying to develop this hybrid turbo technology. Basically, he was one of the forefathers of KERS, using kinetic energy of a part of the car and turning energy that you can harvesting it into electrical energy that you can use later at a point of your advantage. So he, long before Formula One, long before all these other forms of motorsport were into KERS and hybrid and all of that, long after Al Gore made it sort of politically appropriate to be interested in all of it. He was ahead of the curve. And this car is sort of ground zero for all of that. This car was their test bed for all of this turbocharger technology, where they were taking kinetic energy out of the turbine and storing that kinetic energy in the form of electrical energy in a huge battery that sits on the left-hand side of the monocoque. So I started to ring Tokai University, and I was really lucky to get onto a couple of English-speaking people. The project had since wound up, and Professor Hayashi had left, and he'd gone back up to Yamagata to where his workshops were, and he'd sort of ceased involvement with the university. But I was lucky that there was a couple of English-speaking people there that gave me clues as to where they were and to what they were doing with the car. They actually had the XJR-15 back up in Yamagata, and they were continuing to develop it without the help of the university anymore. So it led me to, they gave me a couple of phone numbers, and most of them led to dead ends except for one. They gave me the number of a guy called Yuji Takahara, who it turned out, I didn't know at the time, but it turned out was actually basically Professor Hiyashi's right-hand man. And I was really, really lucky that he'd just come back from a stint in Europe running Formula 3 cars with Kimi Raikkonen's Formula 3 team in Europe, and he spoke fluent English. So it was amazing to, after having so many dead ends and days and days of sort of getting a sniff that this engine was out there somewhere, but I was sort of about to give up hope, and I finally got onto Yuji, and I said to him, "Hey, where's this engine?" And he says, "Oh, I'm standing right next to it." Straight away, my ears pricked up. And I said, "Okay, would you sell this engine?" And he said, "Well, I think we can sell this engine, yeah." And I said, "All right, well, what about the chassis of the car, the XJR-15? And he said, "Oh, no. We're still using this to develop our hybrid turbo technology. We will be using the chassis until the project has run its course." And I said to him, "All right." I said to him, I knew at this stage, since he'd left and ended his association with the university, they still needed significant cash injections to keep paying Yuji's wage, all of the other people in the factory to keep paying their wage, the machinists and all the other people they had there, they still needed money to come in. And I sort of got an inkling that from the tone in Yuji's voice that they needed money. So I said to him, I said, well, how's this for a proposal? What if I was to make a deposit on the car now, and we agree on a price now, and you keep the car for however long you like, and you give me a phone call when it's time to come and pick it up? And he said, look, call me back tomorrow, and I'll ask Professor Hayashi. So I called him back the following day, and he said, I think we can do this. We have a deal. So I said to him,
wow.
He said, if you want to come and inspect the car, we can, and if you come and see me, we'll make a deal. And at this stage, I had no idea how much money they wanted. They could have wanted crazy numbers, but I just had a feeling that I had to get there straight away. So I said to him, I'll see you tomorrow. I said, what time do you open? So by this stage, it was late morning in Melbourne. And I said to him, what time do you open tomorrow? He says, I'll be here from 9 a.m. I said, I'll see you at night in Yamagata. So I got on the red eye that night. I got into Narita in Tokyo at about 6 a.m. Got on the bullet train. I was at his door at 9.
Wow, that must have been brutal.
Yeah. Like, I actually went in a suit because I've been warned that Professor. I'd done a little bit of research, and I've been warned that Professor Hayashi was a very, very old school, very sort of OG Japanese business, and sort of in Japanese engineering circles, he's revered as almost like a god. So I took the extra precaution of wearing a suit to actually go and inspect the car. That's the only time in history of looking at cars and doing anything.
There is a picture of that.
There is a picture of you in a suit here. I
want a suit for the express purpose of inspecting a car. So there I am. So that was just after we'd done the deal. I'm there. That's Yuji Takahara, the whiz kid from the Formula 3 team.
Wow. And Jody, what year is this? This
would be early 2015. Early 2014.
Yep.
Early 2014. So we had Professor Hayashi there, but he doesn't speak English. So I was standing there looking at Yuji, saying what I thought, and then he would turn and look at Professor Hayashi and translate for me. And I didn't have a lot of money, so I was basically crossing my fingers and hoping to God that whatever number they came up with was within my budget. And the number they came up with, I could not believe it, but it actually was affordable for me.
Yeah. So that could have been a deal breaker. Like if they'd said a number that just was not even possible, it would have been flying straight to it was a total leap of faith. I had no idea how much money they wanted. It was just one of those things in life where you just leap and think about it later. So we shook hands on a deal. I gave them I wired them a deposit straight away whilst I was there. We did that handshake. I walked around, photographed every single square inch of the car, and got back on the Shinkansen, the bullet train, back to Tokyo, not knowing when I'd ever see the car again. I just handed over a pretty big chunk of money, and left it as an open-ended arrangement. So you call me when you're ready. And this picture here. So about 7 months later, I get a phone call basically from Yuji saying, "Your car is ready. Come pick it up." They'd already taken the engine out of the back in any of the technology that they considered proprietary, because they were very, very secret school. Like even when I was inspecting the car and taking photos on that first day, they were very sort of guarded of their proprietary technologies, because they invested 10 years and of money.
Yeah, hundreds. So, that's huge stuff.
Yeah, when I picked it up, everything to do with the hybrid technologies was stripped, which didn't bother me because I knew that, a few people have said to me, why didn't you preserve this as the YGK, as the Professor Hayashi engineering study car? And, and sure, it's an amazing footnote in hybrid motorsport history. It sort of is where it all began. But the problem is YGK, they had already finished their development with the car, and the engine and all of the turbochargers and the electronics out of the car that they developed, they had ambitions to put that into an LMP2 chassis.
To continue
and to go. They wanted to take it to the next level. So I think they had ambitions to buy an LMP2 garage chassis from Europe and continue the development of the technology, which I don't think actually happened. After I bought the car, things sort of seemed to sort of fritter away, and unfortunately they didn't go onwards too much further, which was kind of sad. But I'm lucky that I got in there before things didn't continue, and this XJR-15 out. Look, for me, the only option was to restore it back to being an original 15. YGK and Professor Hayashi never would have let the engine and all of the electronics out of the company. He still to this day considers it to be sort of highly secretive. So we did really the only thing that was possible with the car, and that was, which was my dream as well. It just so happened that it all aligned, which was to take it back to being a 15. Yeah. So this is the tow truck we hired in Tokyo, and we drove it up to into Yamagata. And there was a blizzard coming in, and there's a picture of me actually standing there in shorts. This is how hopefully and woefully unprepared I was. This is the middle of Japanese winter. I'm standing and we're actually facing blizzard at this stage. We have to get the car loaded, and we have to get south of Yamagata on the highway back to Tokyo before the blizzard comes in. And it's freezing. Like it's like it's near freezing sort of temperatures there by this stage. It's the middle of winter, and it's sort of an alpine area there. Like this is the sort of level of craziness that my dad, my dad who's a bit of a legend himself, he's a legend in his own right. This is the sort of shit that he pulls. Pardon my French.
Please do.
Up on me, and here I am standing loading an XJR-15 as a near penniless kid. In 2014, standing there in the middle of the Japanese winter wearing T-shirts and a short.
So I guess two questions. Are you, I know, not that we've ever experienced something like that, but when something really good is happening and it's all going to plan, you're just waiting for something to fall over and you're like, something's going to happen.
Stage. We were told it had fallen over the day before. I was pretty excited in this picture here, but also we'd done the same thing. Dad and I were planning to get the red eye. I'd asked Dad if he would come and help me because I needed in Japan you can hire a tow truck like we have here, and I was actually driving that tow truck, that tilt tray. But there's so many parts associated with the car and boxes, and the engine, of course, sitting separately on a stand, that we had to drive a large long wheelbase Toyota Hiace van. So I said to Dad, "Can you come with me? And we'll do this together. I really need your help for 2 days in Japan. We'll pick up the car one day, and the next day we'll be loading it down in Yokohama, and then we'll fly home." So we get to the airport the night of to get on the red eye. We're running a bit late. We get to the passport control at customs, heading out of the airport towards the gates, and they tell us Dad's passport's expired. We're running late at that stage. We can actually hear them saying, "Jordan Roddy, Michael Roddy, we need you at gate so and so. We're about to." So I look at Dad, and he actually had all of the straps in his carry-on bag, the yellow strap you see here in the picture down there. He actually had all of the straps for strapping the car down. And so I said, "All right, well, I'll empty out all my clothes out of my bag, and I'll take the straps right now. I'm going to have to do this by myself. See ya." So I ran to the plane, got on the plane. I had an empty seat next to me, of course, and I'm sitting across two seats, wondering what the hell I'm going to do. So by that stage, we were taxiing. We hadn't yet taken off. So I quickly, really sort of cheekily pulled my phone out, and I rang a very good mate of mine in Tokyo, who I know that if I was ever in danger or in distress, if I can ring Nick, he would help me. So I rang my mate Nick Skinner, who I've been dealing with in the car game in Tokyo since I was a kid. I first started importing cars with Nick when I was about 17 out of Tokyo. And I say to Nick, "What are your plans tomorrow? And we've got to make this quick because we're about to take off." He says, "I'm supposed to be going down to the Yokohama USS auctions and inspecting some cars for some people." And I said, "Well, you're not doing that anymore. I need you to meet me at Narita, and you get on the train and meet me at Narita, because we're going to go to Hiace at the hire car pickup, and we're going to go to Yamagata, and we're going to get a tow truck that we've hired in Yamagata, and we're going to bring it all back to Yokohama. I need you to meet me at Narita at 6. And at that point, the phone basically cut off because we were climbing out of Melbourne in the plane. And the following morning, I get out of passport control in Narita, and Nick is standing there.
Wow.
So Yeah, it was just crazy. So yeah, we went up there, and going back to that picture of loading the car, we were there, and by this stage I was just pinching myself, because here I am, I wasn't a wealthy kid. I'm not from a wealthy background. I'm not from a moneyed family, but I'd spent, a lot of my childhood working really hard and saving money where I could, or doing projects and restoring cars where I could, and amassed enough to get my own XJR-15 at age 27.
That's an incredible.
Yeah,
huge.
and, there was a lot of work ahead of me and a lot of unknowns. There were some missing parts, and there was some, there was, we were sort of lucky enough that there's an XJR-15 that's been a resident of Melbourne since it was brand new, chassis 34 out of the Lindsay Fox collection, and we've been fortunate to have that through the workshop a couple of times for various service items, and I was sort of fortunate that I already had a bit of an understanding of the 15, but there were so many unknowns. It was crazy. There's no XJR-15 workshop manual, for example. It's all by your own mechanic instincts. So yeah, this picture here, this is the. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, so like at this time, how many people out there would really have the ability to actually put this thing back together and actually get it back into an XJR-15? Because it's not something that, myself or Luke or most competent, even very skilled mechanics could do, so was that playing on your mind too? That,
look, I'm sort of fortunate. I'm from a great family. My father has been a Jag mechanic since he was a teenager, and he's just Jags. That's all he does. He eats, breathes, and sleeps them. So I've grown up in this family. Dad told me once, you can do anything, and it sounds like a Disney quote, but it's true. You do it, and you commit yourself to it, and you don't look back. You only look forward. So you can achieve just about anything. So I took on this car knowing that there'd be, so many days where I'd scratch my head and hit a brick wall or whatever. But I knew in the end I would get there. And at the end of the day, it's just a car. So we've just done the Murcielago, which I had no idea what it was or what it was about before we started. And right now we're doing a 458 GT3. And before that, we did a couple of DBRS9 Pro Drive Astons. And at the end of the day, all these cars have a common thread. They're a car with an engine and four wheels and a motor and whatever and transmission and suspension. And if you look at them from that macro sort of perspective, and you start at one end and you work your way to the other end, you'll be fine. And that's what we did with this 15. We just started at the front and worked to the back, and try to sort of get overwhelmed by looking at everything. Just pick one little project and just knock that off, then pick the next little project, knock that off, and just slowly, sequentially, and methodically knock off all of these, seemingly insurpassable or impossible problems.
So,
oh, go on, Luke. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, like, you mentioned that, we know that this car came without an engine, and we know that, bits and pieces it came with the engine, but you know what I mean? Like missing, like what bits were missing?
So if you go to the album, there's a picture of, there's a couple of pictures of in my shed. Once I got everything home, I laid everything out on the floor. So I started to lay out all of these XJR-15 parts that came in. So that's the engine and various boxes of parts as they arrived in Australia. That's at the shipping depot in West Melbourne, where everything had just come out of the container and they were entering a quarantine period for inspection. But here we go.
Not so for coronavirus.
Yeah. So this is finally at home. And basically I just I put all of the cars outside. So we cleaned up the floor and we had the entire garage floor to lay out every single oil hose, every single little anodized, beautifully TIG welded bracket, everything. We just lay it out on the floor, and every night after dinner I'd go outside and I'd start piecing things together and basically working backwards, like reverse engineering a Meccano set.
Yeah, wow. So out of that process, there was obviously bits missing and bits you had to make. Like what?
Yeah, look,
what did you find? And
it was missing. Most of the stuff was there. We're really, really lucky that most of the key important parts were there. We had to make some stuff, like obviously the panels were so heavily modified that we had to cut our losses on a few of the panels and make new ones.
Yep.
But things like the dashboard, they put you know, they put something like $50,000 or $60,000 worth of Motec products in the car whilst it was so they could monitor. You know, they had sensors on everything. They had a temperature sensor on literally every single part of the car.
Yeah.
So they had so many little warning lights and switches screwed into the original dash binnacle that we had to, like this is an example here. This is the mold that we made for the XJR-15 dash binnacle. So we molded the original part out of the car that had all the holes in it. And from this, you know, we were able to figure out that a 15's made mostly, like nearly every single composite part of a 15 is mostly what's called a 4x4. I'm trying to remember. I think it's a 4x4 185 GSM twill carbon fiber pre-preg.
Yeah.
So most of the cars are made out of that. So we found there was only 2 suppliers of that left in the world, and we found a supplier and we bought heaps of it. We started making molds like this, and we just started making parts. It was, you know, it was just one of those things, just one by one, step by step. We made things, but it was sort of funny with this car because when it arrived in Australia, I was so, you know, well, this is the restoration of the original rear clamshell. It had been in storage for most of its life because most of its life it hadn't had a rear glass house. It had running a composite panel in its place as the YGK car. It had been heavily scratched, and you can't just go and buy these because these are molded in multiple dimensions. And I'll give a quick shout out there to Paddy Parisian. He was one of the guys that really did this project with me. He's basically like a brother to me, and he without him we wouldn't have made it because you know, I don't think I've said it yet, but we did this whole car in 4 months. So
what? Hang on, what?
Yeah. So I really relied on a few of my best mates to come and chip in and make it happen with me. And Paddy was one of the key people, and I still to this day I still don't know how I'm going to pay the debt back because, you know, he did a couple of all-nighters with me. You know, I was there 7 days a week doing, you know, anywhere from sort of 12, 14 up to 20-hour days. Some days I'd just go home and have 2 or 3 hours sleep, and I'd come straight back to the workshop to do the restoration because I haven't actually said it yet, I don't think, but early on in the restoration, I had a phone call from Paul Mathers from Motor Classico, which is sort of like, loosely speaking, it's Melbourne, Australia's sort of version of kind of Pebble Beach or, you know, Salon Prive or those iconic concourse. He said this year, you know, you don't normally see many cars after the 1970s at Motor Classico, and mostly it's, you know, it's sort of even pre-60s, you know, quite a lot of the big cars there are pre-war. He said to me, he says, this year we're doing a celebration of the supercar, and it's one of the rare years where we're actually going to allow modern cars in. And we'd love to have an XJR-15 as one of those key supercars. You know, we've already got a McLaren lined up. We've got a Zonda coming. We've got all sorts of stuff. We'd love for your 15 to be a part of that lineup. We hear you have. At this stage, he didn't know how much of it, because at that stage I probably only had about 60 or 70% of a 15. So at this stage it was, you know, by the time I committed and by the time everything fell into place for the event, it was 4 months out and we'd barely started. So the bulk of this all happened in a 4-month period, and I pushed all of my regular service work out, you know, and I pushed everything out on the calendar. Everything that I could get out of, I got out of, even family events. And I just basically head down. Failure is not an option. Whatever it takes, whatever it costs, I'll just have to find the money and we'll make it happen. And that's what we do.
So, Jordy, I want to bring up a picture that I noticed when I was scrolling through this gallery, because, you know, you just touched on family a minute earlier, and I bring this picture up, and obviously this is not an easy time in your life at the best of times.
My son Hugh was born just after the car arrived. So the car arrived in Jan-Feb, and he was born on the 10th of March. So all the while, you know, I've got a newborn at home, and I'm a brand new father. He was my first son, and you know, I'm so lucky that my wife Jamie, she's an absolute, you know, she's a woman can be a saint, but she is a saint. No, she really had to take the lead with Huey, because by this stage I'd sort of already committed to being at Motor Classica, and you know, you had Jamie struggling at home with with being a newborn, and it had been quite a difficult birth, and she was in hell herself. And here I am, I was loving the project, but I was in my own hell as well. We just taken a project most people would do across 2 or 3 years, and we're compressing it into 4 months.
Yeah.
And even, lots of crazy stuff happened in that period, like our landlord sold the property out from under us. So we had to move house in that 4 months and do all sorts of, there was so many things. We just had to make it happen. There was, Jamie would sometimes only sort of see me in the house for sort of between 3 and 6 a.m. some days. And I'd come home at 3 and I'd leave at 6 to get back onto the car. It was that desperate. I don't know why, but I felt the obligation to Paul Mathers. I'd committed to having the car there. And I don't know, I love setting crazy deadlines. You've probably seen with the Murcielago, we did that in 6 weeks. And all these other things, I love crazy projects, because if you set a deadline and if you really put yourself under pressure, you can achieve some amazing stuff. This car is probably my I don't know if I'll ever top this, to be honest.
Yeah, but I mean, even the Murcielago, I've written the story. As I said, it's coming out in our next magazine. But the fact that you've repeatedly done this is quite incredible, because the Murcielago itself sounds like the same similar sort of time frames, and I guess
I don't know, Dad. Kind of getting back to Dad. When I was a little kid, Dad just bite off more than you can chew and chew like hell. And that's sort of what we've tried to do with these cars, because if you wait till the next year, like it would have been great to get the Murcielago to Car Week, which we did. But if you wait till next year, if we waited till next year, it would have been coronavirus year this year, and we never would have made it. So you just sort of live for the moment and you just go for it.
And I guess a slight interruption. YouTube now, if you search Bespoke Motorcars Murcielago RGT driving in Car Week, there is a video that's been posted, an in-car footage of that, and it's just the most incredible thing you'll see all week. It's very cool. So if to keep that in mind as the goal, and here's the work, I think that's a good indication of why it's worth
me wearing French cuffs with cufflinks, driving a Murcielago.
Doesn't get much smaller than that.
Get chirpies as we go.
So I guess just run us through. I mean, we've got a picture here of the rear clamshell. Obviously, there's a lot of raw carbon. So how much of the body did you need to make? I mean, I'm seeing pictures here of.
We were very fortunate. Chassis 34 was at the Fox Museum, so we quite a lot of body data that we needed to create some of the molds. So we were really fortunate. There's actually a picture in there somewhere of a blue 15 with a laser. So Eric Holton, there we go. So we have chassis 34 sitting in the workshop of the Fox Museum. We scanned every single inch of that car. So we actually have in one of the computers somewhere, we've got a global model of an XJR-15 that's accurate to within 2 millimeters across the whole car. Wow. Every single part of it. Wow. We're talking steering wheel pedals, brake calipers, you name the whole thing. We've got it modeled. So I wanted to be able to have that level of accuracy in the data. So when the car was done, we can say this thing's be as good as or better than a 15 that was built in 1991. It's sort of with that data, and with the help of some people in England that had some of the original molds, and someone that had a spare rear clamshell, we were able to piece together, taking molds off of things and also creating our own molds based on the data from chassis 34. We were able to piece together the doors, the front and the rear clamshells. So incredibly lucky, and to do that in the timeline and with my budget. It was obviously, I didn't have, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to throw at the restoration. I had to be incredibly crafty and sort of resourceful with how we did this, because I was still, Dad gave me no handouts to do it. Dad's a wonderful father, and he's given me so many great opportunities. But even whilst I was doing that project, he was still charging me rent to have the car in the factory. Dad's, I wouldn't be a fraction of the person that I am now, and have achieved anything that I've done without him. So, and it's not fair for me to have done all that for free. But yeah, look, it's sort of look. So there's the original front clamshell. So we actually picked off all of the white crazy sort of bits over the top, and underneath is most of the original XJR-15 panel. Even the blue paint is still there.
Wow.
You know, we tried to resurrect this panel, but we realized to resurrect it would be a disservice to the car because it'd be too heavy. It wouldn't be strong enough because an XJR-15 front clamshell the way it hinges and the way it's loaded on the front of the car, when it lifts up, it's under a lot of sort of abnormal and extreme loading when it's hinged up on the car. So we tried to resurrect that panel, but we gave up very early and started from scratch. It was a monster.
Well, speaking of like budget and time and building these panels, and I guess the laser scanning of it all, like unlike normal steel panels or aluminium panels in a car, carbon, you got to get the molds right. You have to get it right first time. You can't, like, that process is attention to detail, OCD. Max, basically, isn't it?
It's, you know, there's no shades of grey with a project like this. It's either right or it's wrong. So, you know, you just saw that picture back there. There's 3 steering wheels there. So, you know, bear in mind they only made about 60 of these steering wheels. So there's only about 4 or 5 in the world that aren't on cars. I managed to do other XJ. So the one at the top there has got all the holes drilled in it from YGK where they had buttons and things. I managed to find 2 other steering wheels at various corners of the earth. So that, you know, these are the only 2 steering wheels basically on planet Earth that aren't mounted to a car. For these notched bottom Nardi steering wheels trimmed in Savile Grey Connolly, you know, they were made only for XJR-15.
Like, that's one of the things, I guess, that's a bit like gold nugget with your Instagram that I love is like, I was just hunting around the shed and I found this like 1 of 10 XJR-15 bit or Tom Walkinshaw racing bit or something like that. You go out in my shed behind me and it's like, oh, look, there's a common alpha panel from 60 bits, you know, like that's just phenomenal. It's just crazy. How many of those things do you have?
Well, I actually had to pick the best of everything, and then basically from day one with the project, I would buy anything XJR-15 related I could come across in that 4-month period, and create millions of parts, pick the best of everything, and then sell what I wasn't going to use because I needed that money to keep the project rolling. So it was this crazy sort of iterative process of buying everything that you can get your hands on, but being able to sell it quickly enough to buy the next round of parts. So that was the final that I settled on.
So I hate to point out, obviously, that plan has not been entirely successful because you'll see there's a set of wheels on the screen and there's also a set of wheels behind you there.
They're the actual original YGK wheels of the car. I can't bring myself to part with them. Right now I'm in we're actually at my mother-in-law's farm in rural Victoria, and I've basically taken over her shed. So you can see we've got my repeat here. We got this place is chock full of my stuff.
As any good mother-in-law would allow you to do it.
Well, Dad would charge me to use the space. So I look over towards the house. Is she watching? I don't know. But now I'm very, very fortunate to have a wonderful family, you know, and it's not just my dad, it's not just my mum, even my mother-in-law gets behind me with this stuff and provides a facility like this for me to be able to run facets of my business from.
Yeah, fantastic. So I guess we're going through, so we'll sort of speed through. It's a matter of piecing a Meccano set together with no instructions and possibly missing bits and bits that you don't know where go where. And
so we've just mated the engine back onto the back of the rear bulkhead of the monocoque for probably the first time in 15 maybe more years, maybe sort of getting up towards 20 years. Because it was pulled apart quite early in its life by Professor Hayashi. So if we go back to that picture, we're just about to put the transmission back on the engine for the first time, and that's literally moments after the engine was mated to the bulkhead for the first time. So we can see those gorgeous 316 stainless and Inconel headers. They're literally almost straight off the XJR-9.
Yeah, they're stunning. If you guys are listening to this in like audio stream on Spotify or iTunes later on, jump back onto YouTube and have a look because it's just stunning engineering pornography going on here.
It looks like a musical instrument. It's like a I mean, obviously, you know, the cliche of being a French horn, but really you could polish these and take them into an orchestra and they wouldn't look out of place. Like they're beautiful, you know.
It's if we go back in the picture, it's a great. This is actually a really good example of how an XJR-15 engine is a stressed member. So if you look at the top, so on the camshaft covers there's these blue plates that tie into the top of that escutcheon in the monocoque. So the motor actually
can you zoom in on that, Andrew? Just
you can see those blue plates. So they're the top engine mount. So the engine actually ties.
Yeah, crazy.
So that's where the top loading goes through, and then down in the sump there are these big sort of eared lugs that come out sideways, and unfortunately you can't see them in this picture. But quite a lot. There are some diagonal steady bars that go above the engine up into the top of the roof turret across from the gearbox, but largely, quite a lot of the loading from all of the rear wheels. You imagine the strength of this car that is required, and all of the the dynamic and cyclical loadings that it goes through as on the road or even on a racetrack. It's all fed through the engine. It's fascinating stuff to think that everything that's happening to the wheels, everything that's happening to the engine and the transmission, those little vibrations and bumps are being fed into the chassis right behind your neck, your shoulders.
Yeah.
It's the coolest thing. You feel, and it's an old cliche with cool cars. You don't so much as get into them; you strap them on, and this is one of those cars.
Was this car the start of big guys in small cars?
Yeah.
What's the hashtag you've got? It's like again another
small cars.
What was it again? Sorry.
Big fellas squeezing themselves into small cars.
I think there's a photo of that of like the first day Andrew and Geordie was
trying to find
inspecting the car or something, and it's like the essence of that hashtag right there. Big fellas, small cars.
Because know me, I'm 6'3" and I'm a big dude. I'm certainly not skinny. Slim Jim pretzel. So I love being someone that's interested in cool cars. Most of the cars that I'm interested in I don't really fit. So quite a lot of the cars that I've raced and owned, I have no business sitting in them, but I somehow find a way. And then, what is it, the old Instagram joke, if I fits, I sits.
Well, that was another thing, I guess, that the newer modern, like, race cars, I guess, like your GT3 that you've just, finished the Ferrari 458 GT3. Like,
didn't really do much to that car. That was... I got to thank my mate Phil Hughes. Has had a lot to do with that car over its life. It was so damn good. It didn't really need much. It was a peach of a car, an absolute peach. So that's probably the easiest sort of recommission sort of birthday project I've ever done. We had to just do a little bit of paint and tidy up. But that thing, it's funny for such a svelte and small and sort of tightly packaged car. I actually fit like a glove in that thing. It's the weirdest thing. I actually fit better in that thing than I did fit in the DBRS9, which doesn't make sense.
Because it's just such a
it's not made. It's not a small Italian driver car.
Oh no! So here we go. This is a great picture of looking sort of laterally at the XJR-15 monocoque with all of the sort of major components bolted on. This is, in essence, the car. Everything else that you don't see here is all just pretty stuff. This is the car really that you're looking at. So you've got that amazing XJR9 monocoque in the middle, just this stunning piece of carbon fiber artwork. And there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours that went into crafting each one of those monocoques at Aztec Composites back in 1991. But you can see those stunning was it they 335 section rear tires.
They're huge. When you were talking about loadings before, and the engine being a stress member and having to transfer all that to the chassis, like in my head, I just had these fat, big, wide tires on there, and the amount of load that they could generate to push through the suspension and push through the chassis and the body. It's crazy.
I'll give you a cool little fact. Go back to that picture there. The picture of the car.
Yeah.
This was the final dummy build. So this was the final sort of piecing together of everything before we were happy with the fit finish of it all. So from here, the car got stripped down. Everything was cleaned and if necessary, refinished, and then rebuilt again. So this was only about probably 8 or 9 days before the car was sitting on the floor at Motor Classica as a finished and running car.
Wow.
This is a little bit earlier than that. So this is an early dummy build that we did. And you can see it's still got the YGK 5-spoke wheels on it rather than 6-spoke wheels. And the monocoque is still covered in a protective wrap that I'd put on sort of larger sort of sections of it. Here is an early body dummy fit. This was probably taken at about 3 a.m. when I was just bored and thought I'd take a picture. We're starting to see the car in primer. There's the rear clamshell that we've just finished. That's still in raw carbon. And we're doing, in this picture, I've just finished the fit offs on the rear lamps.
I can see that.
So that's me. I've just been notching out little sections of the new front clamshell to try and make the pop-up headlights work properly. And I thought I'd send them. This was about probably 8 p.m. on a Sunday night when most people are out at home cuddling up to their wife and with a little skinny cut-off wheel. That's the first time we had a badge fitted to the clamshell. So that was just checking all of the mounting holes and all of that. We're really happy. We managed to find an original badge. That's some bonnet lock extensions that I had to make up as per the original parts that go into the car, and they get bandaged. They get carbon fiber bandaged into the panel, so the bonnet locks actually mount off those pads.
That's
a run of. There's another sort of. They are the rear attachment points they're the forward attachment points for the rear clamshell. So there's 3 of those on each side. So I made two or 3 sets of those just because I thought I could make some and sell to people. I don't know who on earth would be buying XJR-15 shell attachment points, but yeah, that
why isn't your Instagram handle Mr. XJR-15?
15.
There's a run of nuts that I've made. I've done 2 or 3 runs of those now. It's amazing. XJR-15 owners are very fastidious people, and every time you knock the wheel nuts on and off, you mark the nuts and damage the nuts just a little bit every time. So I've actually had quite a good little sort of run of selling. If you go back to the nuts there, we every now and then I'll do a run of wheel nuts, and it's funny. They're coloured red and blue, so it's like port and starboard on a boat. So and it just tells you, because obviously they're handed. There's left and right hand thread for different sides of the car, so the different colours are a really handy way of letting a race mechanic know. So these are the same wheel nuts that were on XJR-9 at Le Mans. Of letting a race mechanic know which way to spin the rattle gun when they're doing a wheel change. That's a set of nuts that we made, and they're all sold on XJR-15s around the world now.
That's amazing. And then the fantastic. Then I'm just looking. I mean, just walk us through the amount of work involved in that seat assembly. There is just mind blowing. For what was
the seat assembly itself was heavily damaged. Well, it was not heavily damaged. It was modified quite heavily because. This is as you see it finished. So an XJR-15 road car like this normally has what you see there, a one-piece, we call it the bench seat, where it's this one piece, trimmed in Connolly leather thing and it's actually got little purple. If you zoom in there, in between the squabs there, that's actually purple velvet.
Yeah,
that's the.
That is the coolest thing in the world.
That's the way all the road XJR-15s were built.
So you had to get that material, Jordy?
Yeah, we had to match the same merhead hides and the same colours, and getting that purple velvet was a nightmare.
Please tell me you did a suit out of it as well.
No, it was pretty expensive stuff, so we only bought a couple of meters of stuff.
That's a shame.
But that was another thing. My mate Justin from Just Interiors, he was working at Blackman's at the time. He really rose to the challenge with that car, because not only do we have to get the colours right, the stitching right, even down to the grain. I wanted the grain of the leather to be exactly as per original, and we were lucky to have little bits of the original leather left. And we also had chassis 34 at the Fox Museum as a sample. So we were it was just one of the. It was the craziest thing. There's this old sort of adage of putting many irons in the fires, and most of the time I had like 20 irons in 20 different fires, trying to push various aspects of the project along. And sometimes you didn't know where to look next, because I was doing this in a 4-month period. You'd have an issue with. Justin would have an issue with finding the right leather, or the right quantity of leather, or the right grain or color, and then you'd speak to them who was making the wheel nuts, and he'd have an issue with heat treatment. The first set of wheel nuts we made, they didn't come out right because the heat treatment wasn't consistent through the aluminium billet. so the colors of the red and blue were coming out blotchy. So it was, sometimes it would be like 3 steps forwards, 10 steps backwards, and it was just one of those things where you just have to keep fighting and fighting and fighting and just not sleep. Make sure it happens.
And I mean, because we touched on this when we were talking about the Mercy restoration, but just the sheer amount of time. I mean, anyone who's ever done a car restoration project or any project knows that the sheer amount of time just in sending emails, looking at websites, finding phone numbers, hoping not to catch people when they're on the lunch breaks, like it's mind-boggling. Just like the sheer amount of admin time to pull a project like this together before you start to even think about doing the actual work. Like, that's amazing.
It's overwhelming. Sometimes you just want to, and I'm a big sort of scary, ugly guy, and it's probably weird for me to say this, but sometimes you just want to go out the back and cry, because no matter what you do, the project just keeps fighting you. But you just grit your teeth and battle on, but it's the time involved in it is incredible. Like, even like, for example, with the Murcielago that I did, I was working on the car from 8 a.m. until 2 or 3 a.m. and then I'd have to go home and deal with the international stakeholders. So you're not just we're in Australia, we're in a strange time zone. So most of the time, even when it's finally time to sleep, you can't sleep because you've got to get on the phone. You've got to speak to the guy in Detroit who's reprogramming the ECU for you, or you got to speak to a guy in Austria who's trying to find a strange, left-handed threaded rose joint for you, or just something weird that was specifically made for the car. It's crazy the amount of hours that go into aspects of the project that you barely see or understand when you see the finished project. And it's the same goes for the classic cars you see at these car shows. People look at the bumper bar, the beautiful, front chromed lump of iron on the front of most classic cars, and they just see, I think, that was nice. They fitted that up and they checked it and they had it chromed and they bolted it on. No, they didn't. They had it stripped. They had it on the car, then they had it off, then they had it on, then they had it off, then they had it on, then they had it off, and they just kept making changes. And it's this sort of iterative, over and over process of making restorations perfect, where the time goes. For example, like with that 15, over that 4-month period, we probably built the car 4 or 5 times. We just have it together and then apart, together and apart, before we were happy with things. It's just as well I love these things, because if I didn't, you wouldn't do it.
Yeah, exactly. It's incredible. So I guess we move on. We've built it up for the first time. It's gone through paint. There's a wonderful photo that I love of obviously the components here being painted. There's a brilliant photo in the paint shop, and like, what was it like starting it up for the first time? How was that experience?
Watershed. It was indescribable. It's kind of like be careful what you wish for, sort of a moment, because I had no idea how I was going to feel or react, because most of my life I'd been, the 15 was my grail car. So most of my life I've been thinking and working towards this moment. And most people have those sort of aspirations and those sort of grail things that they want to achieve. And quite a lot of people never are fortunate enough to go on and do that. So for me to have done this at a young age and to have been fortunate to be in a position, but also working bloody hard to make it happen, this is the moment. So the car was due in at Motor Classica at 6 or 7 a.m. on the Wednesday morning. I think it was the Thursday morning. And this is 3 a.m. So this is, I drove it around the block. So we finished the car, put it on the ground. I drove it around the block, and it was 3 a.m. by that stage. I went home. So yeah, we popped a couple of bottles of Verve.
Yeah, I was about to say, what are you drinking there?
There you've got my father Mike on the left. He contributed a bit to the project, but overall, sort of, he was my moral support. On the right there, you've got Paddy Parisian, who was, one of the main guys that really sort of made it happen. And sadly, not in the shot. You've got a guy who I've been friends with since I was basically a toddler, Phil Emerson. He's not a mechanic and he's not, a hands-on car guy, but he really sort of got behind the project with me and did whatever he could. He's basically like a brother to me. So the four of us there were there that night, and we finished it with about an hour and a half to spare before it had to go on the truck and go to the event.
That's incredible.
Well, there were no comps. So this picture was at sunrise, about 3 or 4 hours later, before it was pushed inside. It was just crazy, because a lot of people do these kind of projects and they work towards an impossible goal, and they will compromise and cut corners where necessary to make that goal happen. Whereas I approach this from the perspective of, it has to be right. It has to be exactly, because I planned to own this car forever and a day. I didn't really ever expect to sell it. And we'll get to that later, because after the event, I realized there was so much potential. I overextended myself so hard financially that I had to sell it at the time. But I built this car to be my forever car. It was my dream, and it's the same as, when I work on anyone else's car, I work on it as if it's my own. And I was so proud that we'd done that car. We'd finished it literally with hours to spare, but we hadn't cut a single corner. We'd built it exactly as I wanted to. There it is. So that picture is taken about an hour later. It's inside the event, and it's next to Peter Hutton's Spa Silver 220.
That's great.
Well, the funny thing is, with this picture, I'd been awake for 34 hours when I took this photo.
Wow. How did you even get that photo straight?
Yeah, it was crazy. And this is that night at the Motor Classica cocktail party. I went home and I had 90 minutes sleep after prepping the car for the cocktail party. So that's me after having a 90-minute sleep, after being up by the time I'd had my 90 minutes sleep, I'd been up for about 36 or 37 hours. Just great mates, Brett Dunstan and Phil Caldwell. They're two great friends, basically family to me, and it was great to have them there at the cocktail party that night to celebrate with me.
Yeah. So after Motor Classica, I guess, when was the proper first drive? What was that like?
We weren't quite happy with the ride height at Motor Classica. This is the first time I sat in the car proper after Motor Classica, this picture. So we came back on the truck on the Sunday night, and that's me sitting in the car at about 9 p.m. on the Sunday night after Motor Classica. The following day, I think it was the Monday, we did some ride height adjustments. It was sitting quite low at Motor Classica, probably just a little bit too low front and rear. So we did some ride height adjustments.
Is that on purpose?
Sorry?
That wasn't on purpose? That wasn't like stance life or anything like that?
We estimated where the ride height needed to be. So we were pretty happy with it. But once we started pushing it out at Motor Classica, we realized it was sitting too low. We didn't have any sort of cool stancy sort of aspiration. We underestimated how high it needed to sit. And this is actually that picture is actually quite pertinent there. That's actually the following day, making ride height tweaks before we did the first drive, the first proper drive. Yeah,
that's incredible.
So, following day, it went to live at my house. It went home.
It's going to interrupt you. So the picture I'm about to bring up, when I was scrolling through this gallery, the one shot that really resonated with me as something that represents this story more than just about anything is, imagine walking out to your garage of your house and lifting the roller door, and there's an XJR-15 in there. And I love that. I just think it's fantastic that, a lot of what did that feel like,
Oh, look, it's there are so many adjectives and superlatives or whatever you could use. It was a dream come true, and I pinch myself quite often thinking back to, is the car's orders of magnitude more valuable now than when I owned it. It's now probably worth 2 to 3 times the amount of what I sold it for. So my chances of ever owning it and having it back again are probably fairly low. So just thinking back to that time of having my own XJR-15, but much more than that, it wasn't a car that I bought with some kind of financial windfall or whatever. It's a car that I'd earned and sort of clawed every single inch of the car into my ownership. Every single part of the car had my finger, every inch of it had my fingerprints on it. It literally had my blood on it. There was quite a few places where I got cut on it.
Especially with carbon fiber. Absolutely.
I had plenty of shards in me, but there's still actually probably drops of my blood around the insides of the sills where you've got to shove your hands to attach all the bladders. That's something I just did to prove to myself that you can go shopping in an XJR-15. So that's soft drink and things. So that's the day I went to Woolworths in a 15.
Yeah, wow.
That's cool. There was a 15-year-old kid sitting out the front with a BMX, and he thought it was a Lambo. Just,
well, at least he didn't mistake it for something much worse than that. At least because I mean, and remind everyone out there as well, like Jordy, you're still 27 at this stage too, right?
Yeah, I was 28 by now, I think.
Yeah. So turn 28 while you had the car. I mean, like that's just like mind-boggling for anybody, I think, to be able to do the work that you did and get the car and then be able to enjoy it at that age. You know, that's just phenomenal.
Yeah. I as I say, I still can't believe I did it. You know, I've done some amazing and very fortunate and lucky things in my life and had some great opportunities, but you know, I've worked bloody hard for all of them, and I like to think that every opportunity I've been given, I've done justice. But that car it really was fake. You know, it was I don't know if I'll ever pull off. You know, I pulled off some pretty exciting stuff since, but I don't know if I'll ever do something in that realm again, because it's you know, it's almost, you know, I keep using the word Disney. It's almost like a bloody fairy tale. You know, to have found that car and been in a position to restore it and found everything that we needed to find, with literally sort of a, you know, if you drew a Gantt chart of this car with a critical path of the project that we did, everything that we needed was found almost in a just-in-time scenario. You know, it got to the day where I needed to find a steering wheel by, or needed to find a wheel because one of the wheels was missing, and I would find them the final day that I'd allowed, because I'm a mechanical engineer by training, so I had a very, very specific schedule that we had to work to, which quite often didn't work, but we still tried. It's like it's like a higher power was pushing me through, because there were so many, you know, I think they made so few of these cars, and there was so few spares put aside for these cars to have found everything we needed, and really all at a moments left to go. As we went through the project, it was remarkable. I'm lucky that, you know, guys like Steve O'Sullivan in the UK, who I think he's since sold it, but he had a large sort of cache of spares. You know, that he was keeping for his own car. He was gracious enough to allow me to have the bits that I desperately wanted. And you know, a few other guys in the UK that have collections of goodies. They all sort of opened up their war chests and allowed me to have. You know, I had to pay for it, but they allowed me to have what I needed.
So how does that work with collectors like that? Is it a matter of, you know, all of the owners sort of know who's got what and where the cars are, and once you have one, you know, they're quite friendly and open to talk, or is it hard to reach people like that and try and find out what they've got? And
being an Australian is quite a weird thing. You know, quite often, especially speaking with English, they tend to kind of have a weird sort of attitude towards Antipodeans like us Aussies.
Convicts.
To break down the wall and establish a real friendship with some of them. Some of them are great. You get on like a house on fire straight away, but there can be a real sort of icy layer that it's quite difficult to break through. And the only way to do that is just dogged persistence. Just don't give up. Keep calling. Don't stop calling. And just try and make them understand that you've got this impossible thing to do and you can't do it without them.
Get that buy-in.
Get
that buy-in. Jordy, I'm like, you know, for most of us out there, to even see one of these cars, let alone drive one, is, you know, just out of this world. Like, can't even fathom doing that. Just if you could describe to us what it was like to, you know, as your hero car, you know, everyone, you know, I dream of driving an F40 one day. That was my car when I was a kid. You know, I kind of can't imagine what that's like to hop in and drive, to run through what it was like. What were the feelings? What were you going through? Like, you know, how was it?
Getting to a 15 straight away, it's quite a sort of exercise of body contortion. So you've got a door aperture, and then the seat is actually quite a way forward from the door aperture. So You don't just slide sideways into the car, you slide sideways and forwards, so sort of diagonally into the car, which is all well and good if you're someone like Martin Brundle, which the XJR-9 was designed around. You know, he's probably a 5'10", you know, probably 60 kilo ringing wet bloke. But me, I'm over twice his weight, and you know, I'm a solid, quite a lot taller. It's crazy, you know. It's like getting inside a tube. You really everything, you know, even to get, I have to sort of recoil my neck into my body and pull my head down just to get my head past the roll cage that's hugging up against the inside of the turret. You know, so just to get in, it's already a sense of occasion. And a lot of people sort of decry the XJR-15 for being a bad car because it's so hard to get in and out of. But I actually look at it from another way, in that it's kind of like it's testing you from the beginning. Getting into it is a pain, but it's a sense of occasion. You know, you really feel like you're strapping on a rocket ship as you're getting into the thing. So you get in, once you've got in, you've contorted your body and you've slid sideways and forwards and bent yourself backwards and your back is hurting and all of that. You're sitting inside this amazing carbon fiber sort of shell. Everywhere you look is polished twill carbon, and it's just exquisitely sort of done. You look left, you look right. Every angle of the twill as it comes down through the flanks of the tubs or whatever, if you put a protractor on it with respect to the horizon and measure the angle, it will be the exact same angle on the opposite side. So they're built like a bookend. They're just stunning, every little detail. So, you know, you haven't even switched the car on yet, and everywhere you look, you know, the gorgeous Nardi cut off notch bottom steering wheel, the aircraft, you know, even the switches on the right hand side, there's a little bank of switches for all your ignition and your fuel pumps and whatever. They're all mil spec switches, you know, so they're the same switches that would have been specified by Boeing or McDonnell Douglas or whatever to be put in fighter jets. You know, everything about it is just, you know, it's so immersive, and it gives you chills down your spine before you've even started the car. You know, you touch the gear shifter, you know, it's a remote gear shifter because you've got a transaxle that's sitting a few feet behind you. It's like a rifle bolt to use. It's not like some of these old race cars where they feel like they've got a rubber joint in them somewhere. It's literally like using a rifle bolt. Everything is just precise and gorgeous, and there's no shades of grey when you use things. Everything's sort of is so positive to use. It's the greatest car. And then you flick all of those switches on in sequence and you start it up. And that V12 that's literally, you know, sitting behind your head here, it fires up and roars to life. And, you know, you hear and you feel everything, like all the valves opening and closing. You can just, it's amazing. There's nothing quite like it, you know, and I've driven many amazing and, you know, very, very valuable, you know, multi-million-dollar supercars and race cars of all manner and description, and nothing comes close to comparing to the sort of visceral experience that getting in a 15 and starting it up and driving it is. It's difficult to put into words.
And is that something that's now starting to be recognized? Because I see, you know, maybe it's through, you know, you mentioned Val earlier, and, you know, they had the event here in the UK at Goodwood last year it was now, where they got them together, and it seems that people are starting to appreciate them now, whereas for a long time they kind of didn't. Is that the case, or not really?
Yeah, look, I was kind of the beginning of the wave. Myself and a few other people like Steve O'Sullivan. I did a bit of media on the car and tried to highlight how sort of criminally forgotten it was. And so did Steve. And even then, slightly afterwards, you had Jas in the States, Jas Dillon, come into the frame. And through sort of guys like us, like Steve and Jas and I, we have collectively, you know, started to, because the problem is they built so few of them, and most sold into Japanese collections. And, you know, as most of you know, Japanese collections are the sort of places where cars just get put away and they don't see the light of day for 20 years. And that's the problem with most 15s. They've just been put into a dark temperature controlled warehouse somewhere in, you know, in Nagoya or Tokyo or wherever, and forgotten, you know, and that's probably part of the reason why they aren't part of this sort of popular collective modern day supercar narrative that, you know, and it's the same thing, you know, you're starting to see the EB110 Bugatti cars like the 962, the Dower and the Schuppen and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
They're also cars that most people barely understood or knew about through the 90s because most of them were sold into where they weren't being used. But the 15 in particular is, through the efforts of people like me and some other great people overseas, and just getting them out and going to events and spreading the love of them, they're finally starting to get the exposure and the recognition that they really do deserve. Because if you compare them to, say, a McLaren F1, and I'm not for a moment saying that they're a similar car to a McLaren F1, but they're both Le Mans winning, or they're both sort of winning car.
Yeah,
they're both carbon fiber monocoques. They're both made in England. They're both rear-engine V12, and they're both linked to an iconic badge. Jaguar, McLaren. So when you actually look at them from standing 20 foot or 30 foot back, they actually share most of the key attributes of the McLaren
and
F1.
They share a designer too in Peter Stevens with the two cars.
And so I chat to Peter here and there a little bit on IG, and it's pretty crazy. It's funny. There's a collection here in Melbourne that there was one of the 15s that I restored after I finished my own car, which was Chassis 29 for a very well noted Melbourne collector who's got a McLaren F1 as well. And it was crazy. I went there one day to visit Chassis 29 here in Melbourne, and he had his F1 parked there, and they were nose to nose.
Yeah.
So the F1 and 15 nose to nose parked with together, and to see the lineage and the sort of the family ties, it's actually crazy to when you have them together to see how much alike they actually are when they're parked next to each other.
Wow.
Especially when you look at them nose to nose and you appreciate them purely from sort of like a profile perspective. You can see that the genesis of the F1, which was only a couple of years before the F1, the 15, you can see that there is actually some 15 that flowed into the F1 in its design.
Yeah, the 15's a stunning car. Like, I know it might be biased because of my age or something like that, but as a kid, they were the cars that I had a Scalextrics of, or that I had posters up on the wall of, and just the flowing lines and the short nose and the bulbous back end and the big tires and everything. Like, the XJR-15 is just a stunning interpretation of that era, I think, and in its own right, becoming popular is a great thing to see.
Of course, we would be remiss if we didn't touch on I think arguably the most bonkers part of this project was the race series, when they get a field of brand new supercars, put them on Monaco, put a bunch of dudes that don't own them in, and tell them to go and have fun on one of the most dangerous tracks in the world. Like, how did that happen? What?
Yeah, $1 million prize too. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's sort of. And it's funny, they did the same thing with the 220. They had the Fastmasters series, which was crazy. You had this. So the F1 series, sorry, the XJR-15 race series was called the Intercontinental Challenge, and it was lunatic. You had these wealthy men that had bought the race chassis. So one of the elements of XJR-15 production were race cars, and they paid guys like Win Percy or Hans Heyer or Jim Richards, one of our own sort of Aussie Kiwi blokes, to go and race these cars that they didn't own. They didn't have to pay for damage, but they didn't belong to a race team. They actually still belonged to an investor that wanted to look after the cars. And they put $1 million prize money down for the races that went to the driver. So you've got these crazy. Now they don't care because they want the $1 million.
Yeah,
but they realised early on in the series that there's so many rumours about the series and you don't know what's true. But when I think it's actually like everything, it becomes trying to the stories sort of develop on themselves, and it gets to the point where the rumours are just that, and they're not really fact anymore. But the cool one, probably my favourite sort of rumor that I've taken away from my investigations into the Intercontinental Challenge was they realized that everyone would play it pretty cool until the last lap, because it didn't matter if you led on the first or the second lap, you're going to get punted and smashed into. It only mattered if you were leading on the last sort of corner of the last lap, then you were going to get the $1 million. And you actually alliances amongst certain drivers. Like if you let me win and you come second, and if you let me win and you come third, let's us band together at the top of the field, and I'll give you a percentage of my prize money. So you had these crazy sort of alliances and little contra deals between the drivers behind the scenes of who was going to give what money to who if they won, if that person would help them.
XJR-15 Survivor. That's basically what it is.
Well, basically it was, and
crazy.
And so they then had to counter that crazy sort of situation by making the races of a random length, because everybody was all about sort of positioning yourself to be in the lead into the last lap. You didn't want to be in the lead on the second or the third last lap. You want to be in the last lap. They had to make the end of the races. They had to basically get to a point where they were within 2 laps, or even make the race a lap or two too long, to make the race of a random length, to stop this attitude of people being really cool until the last lap, and then it just becoming this crazy bang-up derby of XJR-15.
That could almost be an idea, almost like AFL in Australia here, where, you have injury time, right? So someone punts on the first lap and there's injury time at the end that nobody knows about, and then you get the flag and that's it. You're off last lap.
So who won in the end? Who took home the purse?
Oh, geez, you're testing my memory. I'm pretty sure it was Derek Warwick off the top of my head. Who took home the money. Yeah,
that's amazing. That's just incredible. Could you imagine that today? I don't know, in the Valkyrie, and there's a race series and you need to pay for it, but someone else is going to take home the prize money. Like, who even thinks that's a good idea? But I'm so glad it happened.
I'd drive in that.
1991, nothing exceeds like excess. That sort of style of living at the time. You had guys that were out there buying, a dozen F40s at a time, being speculators. So there was cubic money flying around the place, and obviously it was unsustainable because the whole world.
Very shortly later.
But it was an exciting time. It bred and created some of the most iconic machines.
And I mean, you've really touched on a point there, just referencing the F40, that when you think about how rarefied they are, but they built 1,350 odd F40s, and they built 50 or 25 or whatever 15s. That's
even mechanic ones, they made, what was it, 106 or 107 total ones. It's crazy to think how rare these things are.
Well, what's rarer than that in that era of like Le Mans supercars? Like the Nissan a bit rarer?
Well, yeah, the R390 is rare because they only ever really built just the one road car. That was but that was quite a thing where manufacturers would do. Oh yeah, we're building a homologation car. Here's the one example we built. We promised to build more later. And
the Toyota GT1. That would have been.
They never actually went into production. Even in Australia, we had the Monaro 427. Oh yeah, we're going to build. They never built it.
No. So, I mean, is there? I read something that the XJR-15 went on to influence the R390 GT1 in Le Mans later in the 90s. Is any truth to that, or?
Well, that's a really interesting synergy with my chassis in particular, with 18. But I shouldn't say it's mine anymore because it now belongs to a wonderful guy in Texas.
We'll touch on that after,
But it's funny because Walkinshaw, being who he was, Walkinshaw was not just a business where they threw money at every single problem. Tom being a Scot, and Scott a very fairly frugal sort of people Scotsman, he was the master of taking something that had a very good foundation, a very good base, but probably wasn't at that time cutting edge anymore, but re-engineering it into being something that was still world-beating despite it not being cutting edge. And he did it time and time again with so many different cars. And one of the most famous examples of that was taking an XJR-15 and turning it and basically selling the bones of the XJR-15 project to Nismo to create the R390s. Wow. Yeah. There's lots of funny little semantic, funny little detail differences between the cars. If you actually measured them by weight, there'd only be a small percentage of things that carry over from one car to the next. It'd be almost nothing. As a foundation, they actually use the XJR-15, and it's pretty easy to see. When you look at pictures of the cars next to each other, they use the same windscreen and they use the same windows. So the turret is actually the same, but the carbon fiber panel that goes over the top of the engine and it's the same windscreen.
Wow.
Yeah. Quite a lot of the critical dimensions of the shell are the same. Instead of having sort of square edges on the sills that you sit between when you sit in the car, they've chamfered them out easier. No, the funny thing is they used complaints from extra customers who bought the cars. It's hard to get into. So they chamfered the sills heavily, so it was easier to slide into the car. So, it's funny how even the bought XJR-15s helped the design of the Nissan R390.
See, yeah, that's it.
Well, when you take them up side by side, they are very similar profiles. Like you look at the front, you look at the back, like so similar.
But getting back to chassis 18, so Professor Hayashi had been at Nismo, and he designed he had a lot to do with the engine that was in the back of the R390 through Nissan. And one of the cars that he wanted to use as part of his YGK, hybrid turbo, hybrid car study project, he wanted an R390, but he couldn't have one because they never got sold outside of the company. So the next best thing to have was an XJR-15. So that's why he went.
That's why he chose. Yeah,
put a VH style of V8 in the back. So it's funny if there is any car out there in the world that actually spans the XJR-15 and the R390 project perfectly, it's really that car, that chassis 18, because at one point it was kind of like half R390, half XJR-15.
That's So I guess it's a leading point. How long did you have it for? So it's on the road. What did you use it for? How did you?
Basically, I stretched myself so damn hard to do this car. I wasn't a wealthy person, and I took out a couple of credit cards to pay for everything. I even took out a couple of personal loans to cover all the costs of it all. And I don't really know what I thought I was doing at the time. I just knew I had to do it. I had this voice in the back of my head saying, "You must finish this car. You must be at Motor Classica, and be damned with whatever the consequences. You have to do it." So it got to after Motor Classica. I was I was quite heavily in debt at the time, and I had a young family. By this stage, Huey was becoming a toddler, and he wasn't so much a baby anymore. And we didn't own a house; we were renting, and I had quite a lot of debt. So it was probably only 2 weeks after Motor Classica when I got a tap on the shoulder from the Gosford Museum, who was a museum in Australia. So, Tony Denny, a wealthy sort of fellow who was born and raised in Australia, but had made a lot of money overseas in Europe. He was putting together this monster car collection on the New South Wales Central Coast,
which was monster. That was huge.
That was in an old Bunnings warehouse, like literally.
But the thing is, they bought this Bunnings place and they spent millions on it, redeveloping it into this car museum. Like they polished the concrete twice before they were happy with the quality of the concrete polishing. Like they did a good job. But yes, they tapped me on the shoulder about the car and said, would you be interested in selling it? We want a 15 for the museum. And we saw your car at Motor Classica and we were very impressed with it. And at that stage, I really hadn't thought about selling it. But here I am. I've got a wife, a gorgeous wife who's just gone the last 6 months without basically seeing me battling through the early stages of parenting and all of that. I contributed where I could, but I really, I can't lie. I really wasn't there. And I really wanted to give them a house to get us into a house because we were thinking about having more kids at that stage, and I was also in debt, so I did the only thing that was really logical, and I had to sell 15. But I don't look at it as a massive sort of as a negative thing because I had I have and I still have today so many more ambitions, and that's why the cars that even you see me owning now, I don't anticipate to own them forever or for a matter of years because I've allowed myself a couple of cars to keep for indefinitely, but most of the big ones I own, I've got a bucket list of cars that's probably about 100 cars long, and I want to
work your way through the list. That's fantastic.
That's what I've been slowly doing, the RGT and cars like in particular the DBRS9. That was a huge one for me to tick off the list. I actually own 2 of them.
Yeah, you did. That's a whole nother podcast.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Actually, Geordie, that ties in quite well with some of the questions that we've been getting through anyway. Like one of the ones we got through was, if you don't mind me asking it now, was hang on, let me just bring it up. Now that you have a Ferrari GT3, once you've grown bored of that, what's next?
And that's the crazy thing. I have no sort of chronological or sequential planning of cars that I must own in a certain order. And quite often I don't go looking for the cars. They just present themselves. I'll be, like the RGT. That was another car I wasn't looking for. I was actually trying to find I think I was trying to find a rare kind of Lancia Delta for a friend of mine here in Australia, a Finale edition or a Martini or something. And it led me into a collection in the hills far up north of Nagoya. And they sent me a photograph of the cars in the collection, and in the background I could see this black Murcielago, but it was quite clearly either one of the GT1 cars or it was one of the cars that people have put the GT1 style of body kit on. So I started to do some research on it, and it was painted just glossy jet black, so I couldn't see any racing livery on it. But they sent me another photograph of it after I inquired about it, and I could see an American Le Mans series, or actually I could see an IMSA scrutineering sticker on the roll cage. And that was when my spidey sense tingled, and I thought, hang on a minute. A lot more to
Geordie sense, the Geordie sense, Roddy sense. Oh, you call it Roddy sense. That has to be it now.
That's how these cars come to me. Quite often I don't go for them. Like the 458. That was, I bought that car with my great mate Phil, and that was a car I had. I've always loved it, and I've always been, following that car from brand new. I was at its first racing event in Australia when it was brand new, but I never really went out with the intention of buying it. It was just sort of a crazy idea that was hatched over a cup of coffee with Phil. We were just talking rubbish one day, and he suggested that I jump into the car. That we'd run the car together, and it's sort of, I thought about it for a minute. I thought, well, that's not as dumb as it sounds, because I love that car, and it's one of the cars on my list, and we can have some fun with it. I can take the car and make it the way I want it, because at that stage it was a little bit rough around the edges. It's funny, any of the cars that I go looking for, I don't find, but the cars I don't look for, I find. The cars I've ever owned have been definitely in that category.
Yeah, fantastic. So I guess we go back to the questions while we're here.
Yeah, I can have a look through. Or you got it open there?
We've both got it open. We can one after the other. How did Jaguar back in the day when they were new? Or Jaguar Sport, TWR, whoever it was, how did they select who got an allocation for an XJR-15, or was it a case of sell everyone we can?
That's a good question. That's great.
There was no, like you see, for example, in modern times, you get massive oversubscriptions with these things, like say with the Ford GT. That's quite a famous one, where not only did they vet you for how you would further the Ford brand, but they also made you sign a contract saying you wouldn't flip the car for a profit.
Who was it who did that? Who was that?
Was it John Cena? He got
sued. I think so, yeah. Yeah.
I came in right at the end of the supercar boom. So it was actually at the point where they hadn't actually sold. Here's actually a really cool sort of anecdote of the XJR-15 story. It probably wasn't actually really meant to get into production and be sold en masse until probably 92 or 93.
Yeah.
The reason why they rushed into production and got them out into the world in 91 is because Tom could actually see that the world economy was collapsing in 1990 and in 89. So the 15 was actually meant to be a little bit more sophisticated than it actually ended up being. It was meant to have power windows and remote locking and all sorts of other features that, in hindsight, wouldn't actually enhance the appeal of the car today. But they were things that Tom wanted the car to have. So they were probably 30 to 50% of the way through the engineering to do all of those features. But Tom realised that the bottom was about to fall out of the world economy. So he rang the lead engineers on the project, and where some of the things they had, 12 to 18 months to continue developing, he said, you've got 30 days. So you can actually see inside the doors, they put all of the mountings in place and all of the wiring in place for the car to actually have central locking. And wow. You can actually see in the design of the carbon fiber doors in it, they've actually got the beginnings of all of the channels there for the windows to actually go up and down, rather than just have like the windows on an XJR-15 are kind of like a Cessna. You've got this thing called, on a Cessna, they call it a storm window, where you can open this little triangular hatch. And it's just like an aircraft, this little triangular hatch you can open. There's so many little things like that they wanted to continue developing on the 15. Like, for example, the rear clamshell was meant to be hinged and on gas struts and flip up, but it ended up just being bolted in place. And it's about a 60-minute job if you know what you're doing to get access to the motor. There's so many aspects to the 15 that could have been slightly better. But it's funny now, but when you look back at it now, it actually doesn't change the ownership experience. And I actually like the fact that there's some difficult aspects to the car. It gives it a personality. It's not this perfectly engineered and preened and, it does everything amazingly. I actually like cars that can be a little bit rough around the edges in certain places and ways, because you feel like you're getting to know this cantankerous, this cantankerous old guy that, you kind of, this is probably a long bow here, but you kind of feel like you're actually getting to know guys like Tom Walkinshaw, difficult guys that were titans of their when, and that's what this car is. It's a difficult car that was a titan of its time. But getting back to the selection process, by the time they got these things to market and they were ready to sell them, it was basically panic stations. So anybody that had the money got one. They had a bunch of chassis left at the end that they couldn't sell, and that was where the LM was born. Obviously, to one side, they just won the 1990 Le Mans 24 Hours, and they wanted to celebrate and do a special car. But they also wanted to get rid of these last few cars, and that was part of the reason they did the LM. So they built 5, 7.4 litre absolute, just bloody crazy monster cars, and they're all sold to the one man.
Wow.
To a Tokyo, and they're all still there. And I'm fortunate that after years and years of trying through various different avenues, we're finally starting to develop communications and a relationship with this collector, and it's fantastic. So it was great to be invited to Tokyo Auto Salon in January this year to be basically the first non-Japanese person to have a close look at these cars.
Wow. What a special experience.
Well, first public event that an LM has ever been to. So we're talking a car built in 1991, one of 5. It got to
the light of day. Yeah, crazy.
2020 before one of the cars actually made it to a public event, and to be the guy that they asked to come along and look at the cars and inspect them and chronicle them was a hell of an honor.
Wow, fantastic. And again, a slight question of my own, how do the LMs differ? Is it just the engine and the rest is kind of the same, or did they make further changes and developments?
So funny enough, they've actually got the synchro mesh transaxle, believe it or not the race box.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
So obviously you've got the engine is very different. Even the block itself is to an XJR-15 road car or race car block. Around the car, there are lots of little differences. Like, instead of having the ECU buried up underneath the right-hand side of the dashboard, it now sits to the left of the passenger seat up against the rear bulkhead, because it's a slightly different shape, the ECU, so they couldn't fit it into the standard box. It's this big, giant, anodized blue Zytec box with these Deutsche connectors, all straight off an aircraft, that come out, and you see this big, huge wiring loom that comes out next to you when you side, and they go through the bulkhead in a different place. Around the car, lots of differences like that. The seat belts are embroidered with LM on them. The instruments, actually, they have a higher top speed on them and all that, but they've got XJR-15 embossed in them. But technically, not too many differences. It's all the same: uprights, dampers, those sorts of things. They've used an XJR-9 radiator.
Yeah, wow.
A little bit different, so it channels the water in slightly different ways, and the inlet is slightly different. But apart from that, it's technically mostly the same, apart from some cooling system differences and, of course, the motor. There's some big aero changes. It's got a big scoop that goes, because instead of having an XJ or an XJS style of intake manifold with throttle bodies that breathe from the little scoops down there, they've got these massive 12 velocity that go straight up, 6-7 inches into the air. XJR-12 or an XJR-9, they breathe through the top. So they actually breathe through a scoop in the roof, these slide throttles. Then, of course, the rear wing sits about 3 inches taller at the back. They actually, and they use the same little pylon extensions. And then they put a little chin spoiler on the front just to give it a little bit more front aero to balance out the jump and rear downforce that it made.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, go on with the questions. I mean, you've partially answered. When was the last time someone, I guess, started one of those LMs? And I guess is the answer probably not for a long time, really.
We don't know.
We saw at the salon, so that's chassis 1, which was the white car. So that car, God knows when it was last started. I've asked a few of the guys that are now sort of involved in caretaking it, and they don't know. So probably a very long time. We're talking, at least a decade, maybe 2 decades.
Yeah. So really, those cars would need a complete rebuild before you started to
absolutely.
To do
and the thing is, because they're in a much higher state of tune than a normal AR-15, the engine, they don't run for example, they don't run a head gasket. They run a thing called a Cooper ring. So, that's sort of 70s, 80s Formula One engine technology. All of those sorts of things would have to be checked. You'd want to get things like the oil pumps apart and check everything, because no doubt there'd probably be little bits of corrosion here and there that you'd have to get on top of. Look, I would confidently say you could get that engine and pull it apart, and almost all of it would be reusable. You wouldn't actually have to replace too much. They're a pretty hardy, strong engine.
Yep, fantastic.
Actually, Xander came up with a really good question, I thought anyway, that's kind of a bit of a discussion-y thing, not so much XJR-15 related, but McLaren F1 is the 250 of the 90s. What would be the next big thing?
Good question.
Of what era? Are we talking next big thing of the 90s, or are we talking about like early thousands?
I'd say the thousands, decade on. 2000s.
Current hypercars from current companies like McLaren, they don't really excite me all that much. They're amazing. The performance metrics are stunning, but I don't know. I'm sort of this dogged old guy now. I feel like an old man now because I'm not really interested in anything that doesn't have a clutch pedal.
Well, I mean, that'd be something, I guess, like, it's already starting to get to that status, but like Carrera GT.
Carrera GT,
like
still a bit. Yeah, possibly. The Carrera GT for me, I don't know, because technically it was born from a stillborn Le Mans car, but I don't know. To me, it just doesn't have like that X factor of it actually went to Le Mans and it won something, or it's there's nothing wrong with it as a car. Like, they drive beautifully and they sound insane, but I'm interested in cars that have got that X factor. And it's usually that X factor usually comes from something to do with competition. So
and I think you touched on the modern hypercars, and this is something that are people with a lot more experience that us are commenting on at the moment. But I think we are going to witness that bubble being burst, and if coronavirus and recession may bring that on, but you've Ferrari Monzas and the McLaren Elvas, they're making these cars that don't really serve a purpose other than just being crazy, and they never really did anything. They don't have any particular race pedigree or history that and I don't know, the XJR-15s, the F1s, they were built as cars in their own right, not to be a special, if that makes sense. I don't know, probably quite confusing, but
to some extent I agree with you. But obviously people are buying these cars, so there are people out there that want these things. There is a demand for them, but I don't know. For me, the thing that's coming out soon that probably there's 2 cars I think that are probably going to be the defining cars of this current period, and I think one of them is the Aston, the Valkyrie. Sorry, not the Valkyrie. What's the crazy one they're doing with
the Valkyrie? Yeah,
Valkyrie.
Yeah.
And the other one, which will probably even sit higher above that, will be the Gordon Murray T50. Because that's he's sort of everything that he's been thinking about since he finished design of the F1. And he's been thinking about the car nonstop. When you I know people that know him pretty well, and I've also read a lot of his interviews. He's still been thinking about ways to improve on the F1 ever since then.
Yeah.
And the fact that into the T50, and he's gonna, so many just incredible. It's a bit of a gimmick that the Brabham fan, he's going to stick on the back. And the key thing about it is it's going to be super light. It's going to have high revving V12, and it's going to have a third pedal, and that's all you need to know. And the fact that Gordon is making it, he's going to put his legacy on this car. I think that will, obviously the proof will be in the pudding, and we haven't seen anything more than sketches right now. But Gordon Murray being Gordon Murray, it's going to be something pretty awesome. I think if he can sort of sell enough of them, and we don't all die of coronavirus. I really hope that becomes the defining car, because for me, that's the one I identify with the most.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So, Luke, if we've got any other questions, we'll roll through. Having a look. How many? I guess we had one question earlier. How many XJR-15s do you think there would be in Singapore? Just you probably have no idea, but as an estimate.
There were at one point. I know there were two, and I've personally facilitated the sale of both of them, so they're not there anymore. One came to Australia for a while, and I restored that car, and that's, funnily enough, that's now sitting in a collection in Illinois in the States, sitting next to an F1 GDR LM.
Yeah, well.
Well, the car that was at the Quail last year, that car that everybody just blew their mind over, that orange LM, that's the car, that chassis 29, the one that I restored straight after so 29 and that F1, they sit together.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so that's one of the four cars, and the other one was off the top of my head, chassis 49, and that's now gone to the UK, where some friends of mine are restoring it.
Fantastic. Cool.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
That I've been thinking about. When are we going to do a book together?
I don't know, mate. I just sort of I don't sort of do anything with the ambitions of it being book worthy, but I just try and do things that excite me, and try and do things that make me want to get out of bed in the morning and thrust myself into stuff and do crazy stuff, buy things that I can't really afford to buy, and all of that, and get in trouble with the wife and all the rest. Some of it actually, it does seem pretty interesting. So maybe one day there'll be a book.
Yeah.
Crazy thing, it's funny, the book-worthy stuff probably isn't so much about the cars themselves. It's about how I bought them. Some of the situations I've found myself in, being in the back of brand new Rolls Royces doing 260 kilometers an hour down freeways in Japan, while the driver in Japanese at the guys that are actually doing the 100 kilometer per hour speed limit, having just really, like, almost, in some ways, some of them are really, they read like they're out of a Bond novel. Some of the situations I find myself in, they're scarcely believable. And actually, sometimes I've actually sold some of these stories to people, and you can see they just don't believe you. Really, in nature, the car world is it's I suppose the word is exciting. The characters in the car world in Asia, and in Japan in particular, is it's unlike anywhere else on earth, and I'm really, really lucky to have met most of the colourful people involved in it.
Because I think it's quite interesting, because you get all of these people that have very disparate backgrounds and experience and works and incomes and finance, all these different people, and they're kind of bonded by one common passion. So you'll end up talking to someone about a particular car, but if you were to take the car out of that circumstance, you would not have ever encountered that person in your life in a million years' time. And I think that's what makes it interesting.
There's that stupid hashtag from years ago, Cup Gang or whatever, which was Cars Unite People.
Yeah.
And it's true. Cars really do unite people. You go to, here in Melbourne, we've got these cars and coffee events called Highball, and they've just gone nuts. You get P1 showing up, and then you get Series 1 Land Rovers showing up, and then you get a Mercedes Unimog, military truck. And you get, if you didn't have these types of events, you've got these people from all different walks of life, all different financial means, different types of families, different racial backgrounds and creeds and religions and whatever. And they all come together through this common love of cars, and it's pretty silly and all, but it's I think cars are one of the few things that can do that. I meet with people on a daily basis that I would never have said hello to in the street, or never had a friendship with them were it not for cars. And in fact, going further than that, some of the people that I consider closest to me in life, and some of the guys that I basically call brothers, I've met through cars. So you know, I owe so much of what makes me happy to cars.
Yeah. They're fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. We're in the same boat, Andrew. A lot of our friends and even family are car related. So yeah, 100%.
You guys have been mates since you were kids.
Yeah, for a while. Yeah, we've been mates. Like Alpha Club. Like we met like when our dad
Club,
from our owners club of South Australia. You know, we met at a car club there. So yeah, definitely cars unite all people.
Yeah, here we are. You know, we got Andrew's in Cambridge. You're in Adelaide. I'm here in blocks of Victoria.
Well,
we're also in sheds talking cars, mate.
well, actually, you know, the move over to the UK was an interesting example of that. You know, if our friend Shay's listening over here, you know, I came here not knowing a single person. We just landed, my girlfriend and I, we landed and you know, and yeah, pretty quickly developed quite a great group of friends, all because of a mutual connection, which all came through cars. And, you know, for that first sort of 6 months to a year before we'd actually met anyone, we actually did have friends over here, which was really valuable. You know, I know it sounds lonely, but, you know, and I think we're realizing this now, you know, when we're all self-isolated for coronavirus, like a lot of this stuff you take for granted. When you don't have it, you actually realize how much you did rely on it. And that was an interesting lesson we had a couple of years ago. And I think we're all learning that to a different degree these days, you know. So yeah,
I can't wait to go for a drive. I can tell you that's I have no idea what I'm going to do, but it's going to be big.
You know, I went to the shop.
GT3 over the bridge, like 100% has to be GT3 over the bridge.
We'll take the 458. Phil and I will take it to Winton and just rag it. He's got a GT1 550 there at the moment. The X. They're really pushing hard to have that car finished, that X Raffinelli GT1, and go and do the Ferrari super test. So have the 458 GT3, the GT1, and so he's got one of those V8 and radicals. So we're going with the idea of using that as a camera car, because that's actually faster than both of the Ferraris. You know, it's quicker in a straight line and definitely quicker in the corners. So if we have that as a camera car, we can do a cool video of the two cars dicing. So maybe.
Do you need invite to that?
It's funny you talk about the first drive. I had my weekly trip to the supermarket last night. I didn't really need to go, but I just needed to get out of the house. And I had this thought, you know, just driving to the supermarket. I actually felt like when I was 16 and, you know, you just got your license and, you know, your week 1 or week 2 of being able to drive on the road, and you find any of those excuses to get out of the house. And you're like, oh, we need more olive oil. I'll go and get it, you know, and you go for this drive. And I sort of felt a bit like that. I had the windows down, it was warm, I had the music on, and I was just so happy to be driving to the supermarket. And it was actually one of the best drives I've had all year, and it was, you know, 10 minutes across the countryside. It was so yeah, when we all get back to normal, it's going to be on for young and old, I think. So
I'll never take a racetrack for granted ever again. That's for sure. I am itching so bad. But we just got to get through this first. Like, holy moly, I hope it doesn't take too long.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. And I hope we have an industry to go back to when it's all better. But
just come up tomorrow, mate. The world will keep turning. It's just we're going to take a few hits first. But it's you know, that's one of the things about cars as well. I think it's one of the first things people will get really excited about getting involved with once all this is all over. Because I can't think of, apart from the people that I love, I can't think of something that excites me nearly as much as a good car.
Yeah. A couple of quick questions. How many people out there are regularly buying XJR-15 parts?
Buying it, it's funny. I don't know. I send bits to America, England. Just a few weeks ago, I sent a box to Japan. Somebody, believe it or not, needed tail lamps. I think their XJR-15 had rolled backwards in a garage.
Yeah.
So I supplied tail lamps and what else did I give him? I forget, but yeah, just a few little knickknacks and goodies. So he'll be getting his XJR-15 back on the road. This is a car that hasn't run since the early 90s. So that's really exciting, this car that we're working on.
Fantastic. I guess another question from Daniel Scott. The repeat in the background there. Can you talk about any plans for that?
No, look, that's That's the new family car. It'll see the light of day soon. But yeah, it's a gorgeous ultramarine black, which is a fancy way of saying it's dark metallic blue. Repeat S. So I've got two little boys, a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, Harry and Huey. And I've always felt guilty that I can't enjoy beautiful cars and fast cars. You know, obviously not driving fast with them in the car, but just enjoying the note of a good V12 in the car with them in the car together. But the Repeat is one of those cars where it's got individual back seats, it's got child restraint points and all of that, and it's actually got dedicated doors, so you can enjoy the sound of a screaming 48 valve 6-litre V12 with your kids in the back. So that's got one of these.
Yeah, fantastic. Planting the seed early on. So, yeah. Now, I guess a final question: any plans for the 458 to come to the Bend in South Australia? The Bend Motorsport.
Yes.
I love the Bend, and as confusing as I find the long circuit to be, like that is just the biggest head F I've ever driven. I think it's second to Burgering in terms of permanent racing circuits. I think it's only second to the Nord.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't want to do the long circuit because it fried my brain doing that. And, because I went there in the Aston. It was only the second time I've ever driven the Aston, so I didn't really know it all that well. And trying to learn the long circuit at the Bend was just horrifying.
Well, they've actually got it on sim now. I think they've released a track for Assetto Corsa. So
yeah,
get on there.
I was talking to Yasser Shahin, or was it Sam? One of the Shahin brothers. Hang on, no. Who's the one that drives the 720? Lovely fella. I think it's Sam.
I think it's Sam. Yeah, Dr. Sam. Yeah.
Sam, and he said when they first finished the circuit, they had Jamie Whincup come and just drive it in a road car with anyone that was there. Like everybody jumped in.
Yeah.
And he even after, it was funny. What did he say? He said, Jamie said, every racetrack in Australia, it's never taken me more than 6 laps to perfect the lap, like to get a very good idea of where the lines are and all of that.
Yeah.
On Jamie's 6th lap, he actually turned the wrong way. So, there's a couple of spots where the long circuit joins up with the short circuit.
Yeah.
And on his 6th lap, he actually turned onto the short circuit when he was meant to turn onto the long circuit.
Yeah, I did that too. So I've got the track on R Factor too, and yeah, did the same thing. Hey, like there's so many little roads coming off because there's multiple tracks, and you just easily turn down the wrong one.
I must admit, my only time driving there, because obviously we picked the time to move over here just as they opened the track. So I've not driven it in anger actually, but when the only time we did was Adelaide Rally, when I was co-driving for our friend Guy, and for that special stage, he sort of manned it. He's like, yeah, let's swap seats and you can have a go. And of course, I've come through that first complex, having never driven the track, and of course, it's a rally stage, not a track, but not realizing that we were taking the first hard right turn as part of the rally, and it's a bit of a last minute sort of break off, but that doesn't really count. So, yeah. Cool. Anyway, I think that's pretty good. I guess we've got one final question, which I think is a nice point to actually two questions. The video, the first time you drove the car and the first time it ran, does the video exist? And is that something you can share to people?
I didn't video it the first time, but I think I videoed it the third time I drove it. But I've put snippets of that on IG. I can put more up. I will. So in the next few weeks, I'll put a bit more in-car up.
Fantastic.
I'm not doing anything exciting. I'm just obeying the road laws, driving around traffic in a 15, but I'll put it up regardless.
Yeah, fantastic. And where is the car now? Like, what's it doing now? It's in Texas.
It's Gosford. It went to Gosford for a couple of years. Then it was bought through Jazz Dillon. He recommended that a friend of his needed, he had to have a 15 because Jazz loved his car so much. So he told a friend of his, I think this is how it went. I could be wrong, but got a lovely fellow called Chris Papamichael in Tennessee. He bought a car from Gosford, but before he did, he sent it back down to me. So it was great. I hadn't seen the car for a couple of years, so I got the chance to have a full going through and a major service on it, and do a few little, sort of negative things that happened to the car whilst it was at Gosford. Nothing major, just like somebody did a little bit of damage to the clutch and a few other little things. So we fixed all of that, brought it back top notch again. And Chris had the car for a little while in the States, but he's got sort of a really interesting and rotating collection, but it's more sort of, I think, Italian and Eurocentric rather than Anglo-centric. So he took the opportunity, especially, he made a bit of money, I think. He sold the car. Whilst he owned the car, 15s just exploded in value. And they were finally starting to get the recognition they deserved. But a lovely fella in Texas took over the reins of the car. That's Barry Fromberg. So he and I are in regular contact. I think we were actually chatting the other day. And the great thing about Barry is not only does he absolutely, he's a dyed-in-the-wool Jaguar Sport guy. So he doesn't just have, he's got the XJ220. He's got a gorgeous 220, and he's also got one of the 50 XJRS Jaguar Sport coupes delivered by North America. So, he's a Jaguar Sport guy through and through to the core, and I love that. But further, sort of on top of that, he the thing I really, really sort of admire about Barry is most collectors would shy away from this car's history as the Tokai YGK study car. They would try and suppress that because to some people that may not be desirable. To me, I think it's the best thing ever.
Yeah.
Is that just worried about from like a value standpoint or like a...
Perhaps, but I think, if you're actually smart enough and you've got a brain between your two ears, it doesn't take much thinking to realize it actually makes it far more special. We've got an XJR-15 here that not only is one of a small handful of cars made in being an XJR-15 road chassis, but it actually basically got the wheels turning for hybrid technologies in motorsports. Like this car is massively significant, and it also was a quasi Nissan R390 for a little while. Godfather of the R390 engine, and he owned the car for a while. So all of these various sort of little subplots and tangents to the car's history, I think, add to it and make it that much more special. It's lived a really full and exciting life, and it's been down here in Australia, and it's been in the United States, and had some great people own it. But I guess I should take the opportunity, because before we did this chat tonight, I wanted to make sure that Barry was cool with it, and Barry couldn't have been more encouraging and supporting.
Fantastic.
History tonight. So
thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Barry. Appreciate it.
I've always, I'm very protective of any car that I sell. I'm protective of who owns it at its current time. And the great thing, like Barry's so enthusiastic about the car's history. I had quite a lot of the original YGK sort of specific parts left over, and he wanted them all. So they've all gone to Texas now.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Well, that's one of the things I think that Andrew and I, except for the wheels. Well, that's what Andrew and I love about cars specifically, as well as the stories behind them. And I guess that was part of the catalyst for him and I to start Sports Car Safari, was to be able to share those stories with people and bring them out of the woodwork. I mean, there's nothing more boring than hearing about a rare car that's been locked up in a garage or a collection for 30 years and then, it's never been moved or never been touched. Like, I mean, for us, for us, cars are there to be used and have a history. Like, I know I've got a little bit of a funky old Alpha 33 4x4 wagon, but like that thing's been up Unadata track. It was owned by an old lady in the Alpha Club, and she drove it everywhere. So I mean, for me, that's not, same thing. It's not a difficult thing to put aside and appreciate the history of that car and where it's been and where it's gone, and celebrate that rather than look at it as a negative.
Yeah. Absolutely, it's and it's the same. Like if you look at our Group A XJS, that car had monster accidents during its time with Walkinshaws. It got backed into a fence at Monza by Enzo Calderari. It got smashed in New Zealand twice by wasn't Denny Hulme. I think one of the accidents was Denny Hulme, and the other one was Armin Hana. And a lot of people sort of, when they get a race car up on its jack stands and they see the evidence of those accidents, you see where they had a new section of rail in, or you see where they had to stitch a new panel on, or whatever. You know, some people that have got the wrong idea with these things would see that as a negative, whereas I would never want to suppress that. I would never want to eliminate that, and I actually want to celebrate that, because that's a significant chapter in the car's history. It makes it more flavoursome to me. You know, there's a great story to it. You know, like, for example, how they repaired one of the big crashes that our car had in New Zealand in '87. We actually tracked down the panel shop that they used in Auckland, and they still had the same master bench with the same knurled clamps that they the rail flanges with. And we went there and we took an imprint off their knurled little flanges, their flange clamps. And we went back to the car, and you can still see the imprints of those.
Wow.
To pull the front corner out on the car like that. You know, that kind of like archaeology. I think that makes it so much.
Well, even I remember you telling me that your car ran in JPS livery for one event in Macau, and then was very hastily returned back to its JRA colours for Bathurst. And you can see the evidence of very quick paint jobs, you know, having been done. And that's
we were trying one day. It skipped a tooth on it's got wind-up windows. It skipped a tooth on the wind-up mechanism, so we had to pull it apart and fix the wind-up mechanism. And whilst we had the door trim off, we noticed all these little bits of black, and we started to. We'd literally had the car for only a few weeks at this stage, so this would have been 05, 06. And we did some digging, and we realised very quickly that it had been the number 8 JPS car. So these things, I think, you know, if you look at a car as a patchwork quilt, starting to sound like Tom Hanks here.
Life is like a box of chocolates.
It's you know, it's I think all of these sort of things, they add chapters to the car, which add to the appeal. You know, to a real car guy like me, I'm far more interested in something in a car that's got all those extra chapters on it than something that just, we raced it, it won, and it did another 3 races, and then we put it in a shed here, and we put a dust cloth over it, and it's now 21 years later, and we just pulled the cloth off, and here it is. You know, I hate the stuff.
Yeah. So
that's awesome.
All right.
Yeah,
well, mate, thank you, Jody. Thank you for joining us. It's an absolute privilege for us to have someone with stories of your stature join us on our podcast. We really appreciate it. And thank you for all your support. You've been massively supportive of absolutely everything we've ever put to you. So you know, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. It's been great. So
thank you, boys. Look, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's great to finally tell that story in detail, because I'd only ever really sort of mentioned it over a few beers to a few people here and there. So it's great to share with the world. And, you know, I really hope guys like Barry that own the car now and XJR-15 enthusiasts alike enjoy it. And even you know, Nismo and R390, Nismo sort of fans and GT1 fans and whoever, I hope everyone sort of enjoyed it. But maybe we should do something more in the future.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Definitely need to have you back on again. There's a big catalogue of stories we need to get out of you.
and keep track. We are, you know, our next issue of Sportscar Safari. It is imminent. Obviously, at the moment, it's tricky, but that does actually have the full story of Jody's Murcielago in it, including the road drive and the restoration and the acquisition in Japan. So that story will be documented as well. So
that's pretty cool.
Stay tuned. So
thanks a lot for tuning in, everyone. Jordy, your Instagram is at
Bespoke Motorcars, all one word.
Very good, all one word.
Yeah.
Andrew's at AGR_Andrew. I'm at Boxer33, BOXR33. Thanks for tuning in. If you like what you see here, hit subscribe. It'd be great to get a few more of you. That'd be the easiest way for you guys to get notified about when the live stream is on. It's a little bit tricky with the software you're using that the live stream doesn't pop up until it actually starts. So if you guys subscribe, you get that notification that we've come online, and you can follow the link straight through. So get us straight from the start. So thanks a lot. Thanks, Jordy. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, everybody.
Until next week.
See you next week.
Have a good one.
See you later.
Gotcha.
Bye.
Bye.